Oh no! Oh god! Oh no! Ah! It's happening. Oh my god, who is this guy?
The stage is set. The field has been narrowed for one night only. The top 10 candidates are here. Our Democratic primary debate starts right now.
Holy smokes!
This is an ABC News special.
It's debate night.
I will be a president for every American.
This is our moment.
We are in a struggle.
Right, these introductions are shorter than usual. Good.
We fight for our country. That's the nature of who we are.
Right now, we can act. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation. We have overcome worse times and darker.
Keep forgetting Booker's running.
We will make the most of this moment that we have here together.
We are on a march together.
We're going to win by being bold. We're going to win by being fearless.
Live from Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas.
Meanwhile,
Here now,
on
Chief
Planet
Editor
Houston.
George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening and welcome to Houston. We
Hey,
are
George.
live from Texas Southern University for tonight's Democratic
I see
debate.
you
The
again.
top 10 candidates are here. It's going to start right now, and on the stage you see them. They have all met the criteria set by the Democratic National Committee. At least 10 others,
Which was clear
have
and
not
set
met the
months
threshold.
ago,
for the first
so
time in
don't
this primary,
complain
a
that your
single
favorite's
debate
not
in a
there.
single night,
Just
with
FYI.
all the top candidates facing off. It is a critical test for candidates.
thank
and their
goodness no
campaigns
John Delaney.
at a
Holy
critical
crap.
time for our country. They're going to lay out their
Guy's
vision
such
for the
an
country,
ass.
their records, their differences with President Trump and each other. And we're going to do our best to bring you a lively, informative, and civil debate. I'm joined here tonight by my ABC colleague, World News Tonight anchor David Muir, our national correspondent Lindsay Davis, and Jorge Ramos from our partner network, Univision. Jorge?
I don't know who any of those people are, but cool.
We appreciate the opportunity to welcome Latinos across the country and to ask about Latinx issues during these challenging times. En este país también se habla español. Este debate se realiza en un momento muy difícil para los latinos en Texas y en todo Estados Unidos, pero es importante que ellos sepan, que sepamos que este también es nuestro país. Let me just give you a little translation here.
Okay, thank you. I don't know
I'm telling
Spanish.
Latinos that despite the fact that we are facing difficult times, this is our country too. Lindsay.
We are delighted to be on the beautiful campus of Texas Southern University, one of the largest historically black colleges and universities in the country. And here in the Health and Physical Education building tonight, we are joined by a live audience of 3,500 people, most invited by the Democratic National Committee, and of course, some of the brightest minds of the student body here at TSU. Go Tigers!
We can feel the energy.
Including Brainy
The rules of
McBrainface
this debate
student.
are very basic tonight and have been agreed to by all the campaigns in advance. Candidates will have 1 minute, 15 seconds to answer a direct question and 45 seconds for a rebuttal or response, as directed by one of the moderators.
Yeah, just,
Candidates will
I have to make
each
fun
see
where they're
green
like, yeah,
lights.
the
There you see them right
we
there,
got to
indicating how
give
much time
the
they have remaining. And
you
when
know
time is up,
cheer to
lights
the,
are
the,
red.
the local venue,
Candidates who
whatever,
interrupt will be subject
and it's
to
always
having their time
kind of
reduced
pointless
later on.
platitudes.
But
It's
this
sort
is
of silly.
democracy, the great American experiment, and the candidates are here tonight.
And I didn't have a
Make their
good
case.
good jive
Voting
for it. So.
places based on their current standings in nationally recognized polls with the leading candidates in the center. All candidates have been told they can have 1 minute to make an opening statement, and we're going to begin in reverse polling order with Secretary Julian Castro.
Good evening y bienvenidos a Texas. Welcome to Texas.
Hi.
It's great to be here at TSU, home of the Tigers. You know, on January 20th, 2021, at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. There will be life after Donald Trump. But the truth is that our problems didn't start just with Donald Trump, and we won't solve them by embracing old ideas. We need a bold vision. Universal pre-K and universal health care, unleashing millions of new jobs in the clean energy economy, a tax
I always
system
love
that
the
rewards people who have
unleashing
to work
thing
for a
that
living.
politicians say.
But first we
It's
have
like,
to win. And
we
that
have
means
it contained in a
exciting,
bottle
young,
somewhere.
diverse coalition of Americans who are ready for a bold future. That's what Kennedy
Bold.
did. It's what Carter did. It's what Clinton did. It's what Barack Obama did. And it's what I can do in this race. Get back Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, and Arizona, and finally turn Texas blue and say goodbye to Donald Trump.
I like his enthusiasm.
Senator Klobuchar.
Good evening, Texas Southern. I believe that what unites us up here, the 10 of us, is much stronger than what divides us. And I think that's true of our country, too. Now, I may not be the loudest person up here, but I think we've already got that in the White House. Houston, we have a problem. We have a guy
like they haven't heard that one
is
before.
literally running our country like a game show. He would rather lie than lead. I think we need something different. I am someone that tells the truth. I don't make promises that I can't keep. I have people's back, and I believe that to win, you bring people with you, and that is how you govern as well. So you're going to hear a lot of ideas up here. Some will be great, but if you see that some of them seem a little off track, I've got a better way. If you feel stuck in the middle of the extremes in our politics and you are tired of the noise and the nonsense, you've got a home with me. Because I don't want to be
the candidate of moderation
for half of America. I want to be the president for all of America.
Yeah, I'm not interested in naming you at this point.
Beto O'Rourke.
It's an honor to be on this debate stage.
The more information I got about her, the less I was
In
enthusiastic.
Houston, back here at TSU.
To, anti-enthusiastic,
On
whatever that
August
might be.
3rd, in El Paso, Texas, two things became crystal clear for me and I think produced a turning point for this country. The first is just how dangerous Donald Trump is, the cost and the consequence of his presidency. A racism and violence that had long been a part of America was welcomed out into the open and directed to my hometown of El Paso, Texas, where 22 people were killed, dozens more grievously injured by a man carrying a weapon he should never have been able to buy in the first place, inspired to kill by our president. The second is how insufficient our politics is to meet the threat that we have right now. The bitterness, the pettiness, the smallness of the moment, the incentives to attack one another and try to make differences without distinctions, mountains out of molehills. We have to be bigger. We have to see clearly. We have to speak honestly, and we have to act decisively. That's what I want to do for you as President of the United States. Thank you.
Cool. It's good to have someone running who understands the problem.
It was over 20 years ago that I was a law student and moved to inner city Newark, New Jersey to serve as a tenants' rights lawyer to try to address the challenges in my community. And I was troubled by them. The gun violence,
Welcome
the
to the
substandard
chat,
housing,
rat.
But it was my greatest mentor, a woman named Miss Virginia Jones, who challenged me. She said, boy, if all you see in this neighborhood is problems, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're stubborn and defiant and can put forth a vision that can unify people, then we can make transformative change. She was a church woman that said, without vision, the people will perish. Well, that's exactly what we did. We created extraordinary
she said the people would
unity in
go
our
to the
community,
parish.
and we did things that other people
church
thought
stuff,
was impossible. That's the story of America. At our best, we unify. We find common cause and common purpose. The differences amongst us Democrats on the stage are not as great as the urgency for us to unite as a party, not just to beat Donald Trump, but to unite America in common cause and common purpose. That's why I'm running for president, and that's how I will lead this nation.
Entrepreneur Andrew Yang.
In America today, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. Our schools, our hospitals, our media, even our government. It's why we don't trust our institutions anymore. We have to get our country working for us again instead of the other way around.
We must
have to
make
see
our
ourselves
country
as the
work
owners and
again.
shareholders of this democracy rather than inputs into a giant machine. When you donate money to a presidential campaign, what happens? The politician spends the money on TV ads and consultants, and you hope it works out. It's time to trust ourselves more than our politicians. That's why I'm going to do something unprecedented tonight. My campaign will now give a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for an entire year to 10 American families, someone watching this at home right now. If you believe that you can solve your own problems better than any politician,
on one end, I am generally, I guess, favorable to universal basic income stuff, but I don't know. I've kind of have a bit of an issue with how Yang's been selling it. Sort of it reminds me of Ron Paul and his gold standard stuff. Like, this will solve all our problems, trust me. And sometimes the logic doesn't really make any sense. It's like, I applaud you trying to sell it, but...
And doubtful at the very moment we need to rise to some of the greatest challenges we've ever seen. As a mayor of an industrial city coming back from the brink, as a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, I know what's at stake in our national leadership. We keep sending politicians to Washington, asking them to fight for us, but then when they get there, they seem more interested in the part about fighting than the part about us. Good politics is supposed to be not about the day-to-day fights of the politicians, but about the day-to-day lives of Americans. We just marked the anniversary of 9/11. All day today, I've been thinking about September 12th,
mic here too much?
The way it felt when for a moment we came together as a country. Imagine if we had been able to sustain that unity. Imagine what would be possible right now with ideas that are bold enough to meet the challenges of our time, but big enough as well that they could unify the American people. That's what presidential leadership can do. That's what the presidency is for, and that is why I'm asking for your vote.
Don't worry, Matt.
Senator Kamala Harris.
I feel unaccomplished sometimes, too.
TSU. So I plan on spending tonight talking with you about my plans to address the problems that keep you up at night. But first, I have a few words for Donald Trump.
She knows what my problems are?
We all know is watching.
Oh, no.
So
She's in my
President
head.
Trump, you've spent the last 2.5 years full-time trying to sow hate and division among us. And that is why we've got nothing done. You have used hate, intimidation, fear, and over 12,000 lies as a way to distract from your failed policies and your broken promises. The only reason you've not been indicted is because there was a memo in the Department of Justice that says a sitting president cannot be charged with a crime. But here's what you don't get. What you don't get is that the American people are so much better than this. And we know that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us, regardless of our race, where we live, or the party.
Harris is another candidate that I was curious about, but the more I learn about, I less elect her.
Unifying our country, winning this election, and turning the page for America. And now, President Trump, you can go back to watching Fox News.
Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders.
Let me be blunt and tell you what you don't hear much about in Congress or in the media.
Well, he waved his finger that I need to check off my my bingo card here.
We must and will defeat Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of this country. But we must do more. We must do more. We
do the
have
thing.
got to recognize that this country is moving into an oligarchic form of society where a handful of billionaires control the economic and political life of this country. And as president, I am prepared to take them on. Yes, we will raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Yes, we will finally make sure that every American has health care as a human right, not a privilege. And yes, we will address the catastrophic crisis of climate change and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel.
Senator Elizabeth Warren.
So I was born and raised in Oklahoma, but I'm sure glad to be in Texas tonight. All three of my brothers served in military bases here in Texas. That was their ticket to the middle class. Me, I got my big opportunity about a half mile down the road from here at the University of Houston, back when it cost $50 a semester. For a price that I could pay for on a part-time waitressing job, I got to finish my 4-year degree and I became a special needs teacher. And after law school, my first big job was back here in Houston. By then, I had 2 little kids, and when childcare nearly brought me down, my Aunt Bee moved in.
A lot
and
of
saved
the,
us all.
I guess,
The paths to
rhetorical
America's
differences
middle
between
class
them is
have gotten a
all
lot
about
smaller
framing.
and a
Yeah,
lot
they do have a lot of overlap as
Today,
far as their platforms
service
goes.
members are
Dan the
preyed
Man.
upon by predatory lenders. Students are crushed
Oh, yeah,
by
it's-
debt,
yeah,
and
it's-
families
it's nice to
cannot
have, like,
afford childcare.
Pretty much everyone relevant on the same stage for once.
I know how to fix it, and I'm going to lead the fight to get it done.
Yeah, looking back at my own college, it's like, wow, that's like cheap compared to what it is
You know,
now.
when President Kennedy announced the moonshot, he used a phrase that sticks with me my whole life. He said, "We're doing it because we refuse to postpone." Well, I refuse to postpone 1 more minute, spending billions of dollars on curing cancer,
Oh yeah,
Alzheimer's,
now
and
I
other
recognize.
diseases, which if we invest in them, we can
Welcome,
find cures.
Ricochet.
I refuse to postpone giving every single child in America, no matter their zip code, pre-K all the way through high school and beyond. I refuse to postpone any longer taking on climate change and leading the world in taking on climate change. Look, this is the United States of America. There's never been a single solitary time when we've set our mind to something we've been unable to do it. We're walking around with our heads down like, woe is me. We're the best equipped nation in the world to take this on. It's no longer time to postpone. We should get moving. There's enormous, enormous opportunities once we get rid of Donald Trump.
Candidates, thank you. Several of you said you are more united than divided, and that is certainly true. All of you agree on one big thing, the goal of defeating President Trump, driving the country in a new direction. But out on the campaign trail, you have outlined big differences over how far to go and how fast to go. And Vice President Biden, the differences between you and the senators on either side of you tonight strike at the heart of this primary debate. Both Senators Warren and Sanders want to replace Obamacare with Medicare for all. You want to build on Obamacare, not scrap it. They propose spending far more than you to combat climate change and tackle student loan debt, and they would raise more in taxes than you to pay for their programs. Are Senators Warren and Sanders pushing too far, beyond where Democrats want to go and where the country needs to go?
That'll be for the voters to decide that question. Let me tell you what I think. I think we should have a debate on health care. I think, I know that the senator says
All right,
she's
let's have a
for-
debate on health care.
Well, I'm for Barack. I think the Obamacare worked. I think the way in which we add to it, replace everything that's been cut, add a public option, guarantee that everyone will be able to have affordable insurance, number one. Number two, I think we should be in a position of taking a look at what costs are. My plan for health care costs a lot of money. It costs $740 billion. It doesn't cost $30 trillion. $3.4 trillion a year, it turns out, is twice what the entire federal budget is. That's before it exists now, without interest on the debt. How are we going to pay for it? I want to hear tonight how
We're going to
that's
pay
happened.
with taxes, Biden.
Friend, the senator on my left has not indicated how she pays for it, and the
We're
senator
going to
has, in
pay
fact,
for it.
come
That's
forward
how we
and
get
said
health care.
how he's going to pay for it, but he gets about halfway there. There's a lot of other things that need to be
Joe,
done.
we
I
pay
drive
for
a
it.
bold plan to
Joe.
deal with making sure we triple the money for at-risk
Joe.
schools that are Title I schools from 15 to $45 billion a year. But I go down the line, and each of the things we're talking about, I lay out how I can pay for it, how I can get it done, and why it's better.
Senator Warren, let me take that to you, particularly on what Senator Biden was saying there about health care. He's actually praised Bernie Sanders for being candid about his health care plan. That Senator Sanders has been candid about the fact that middle-class taxes are going to go up and most of private insurance is going to be eliminated. Will you make that same admission?
So let's be clear about health care, and let's actually start where Vice President did. We all owe a huge debt to President Obama, who fundamentally transformed health care in America and committed this country to health care for every human being. And now the question is, how best can we improve on it? And I believe the best way we can do that is we make sure that everybody gets covered by health care at the lowest possible cost. How do we pay for it? We pay for it. Those at the very top, the richest individuals and the biggest corporations, are going to pay more. And middle-class families are going to pay less. That's how this is going to work.
Direct question. You said middle-class families are going to pay less, but will middle-class taxes go up to pay for the program? I know you believe that the deductibles...
They
and the
keep
premiums
asking
will go
this
down.
question every
Will
single
middle-class
debate.
taxes go up? Will private insurance be eliminated?
Look, what families have to deal with is cost, total cost. That's what they have to deal with. And understand, families are paying for their health care today. Families pay every time an
Yeah,
insurance
I'd love them to be
company
able to
says,
say,
"Sorry,
you know,
can't see
yeah,
that
I'm going to be
specialist."
raising some taxes,
Every time
but
an
your
insurance
net costs are going to be
company
going
says,
down. But if you
"That doctor
say
is
that
out
first
of
part,
network. Sorry, we are not covering that
you run into the
prescription."
issue of,
Families
oh
are
no,
paying
this candidate wants to
every
raise your
time they
taxes,
don't get
and
a
we're going
prescription
to leave out
filled
the rest
because
of
they can't
it.
pay for it.
And
They
then
don't
it
have
just
a
gets
loan
ridiculous
checked
and
out
stupid.
because they can't
But the
afford
media really
copay.
wants their
What we're
soundbite
talking
there.
about here is what's going to happen in families' pockets, what's going to happen in their budgets.
But to give it to them is
and the answer
a
is,
tactical
on
mistake.
Medicare for all, costs are going to go up for wealthier individuals, and costs are going to go up for giant corporations. But for hardworking families across this country, costs are going to go down, and that's how it should work under Medicare for all in our health care system.
Senator Sanders, you were invoked by the vice president. Also take on that question about taxes.
Joe said that Medicare for all will cost over $30 trillion. That's right, Joe. Status quo over 10 years will be $50 trillion. Every study done shows that Medicare for all is the most cost-effective approach to providing health care to every man, woman, and child in this country. I, who wrote the damn bill, if I may say so, intend to eliminate all out-of-pocket expenses, all deductibles, all co-payments. Nobody in America will pay more than $200 a year for prescription drugs because we're going to stand up to the greed and corruption and price fixing of the
The
pharmaceutical
Affordable
industry.
Care Act is a great start,
We need a
but it's
healthcare
far from
system
what we
that
need.
guarantees health care to all people as every other major country does.
And yeah, it's
not a
because it's
system which provides
it has a lot that was good, but it's just unable to address
and the insurance companies.
a lot of the long-term structural issues. For instance, the pointless costs of overhead profit and all that junk.
How bad Medicare for all is because they want to protect their profits. That is absurd.
Vice President Biden,
respond,
you were invoked.
George.
You get a response, and then we're going to broaden out the discussion.
Okay, number one, my health care plan does significantly cut the cost of it. The largest out-of-pocket payment you'll pay is $1,000. You'll be able to get into anyone who can't
Indeed.
afford it gets
It's
automatically
basically the
enrolled in
design that
in the Medicare type option
could
we
get
have, et cetera. But
past
guess
Mitt
what?
Romney in
Of
Massachusetts
the
originally.
160 million people who like their health
The
care
idea
now,
that was
they can
floated
keep
by
it. If they
the,
don't
I
like
think it was the
they
Heritage
can leave.
Foundation?
Number one. Number two,
As
the
a
fact of the matter is, we're in a
alternative to
situation where if you
universal
notice, you
healthcare.
had to answer the question. This is about candor, honesty, big ideas. Well, let's have a big idea. The tax of 2% that the senator's talking about, that raises about $3 billion. Guess what? That leaves you about $28 billion short. The senator said before it's going to cost you in your pay. There will be a deductible in your paycheck. You're going to, the middle class person, someone making 60 grand with 3 kids, they're going to end up paying $5,000 more. They're going to end up paying 4% more income tax. That's a reality. Now, it's not a bad idea if you like it. I don't like it.
Okay, now I want everybody to keep to the time, but you did invoke both senators. I have to get responses to them, then we will run out.
good.
Senator Warren, you go first.
So let's be clear. I've actually never met anybody who likes their health insurance company. I've met people who like their doctors.
I like that line.
I've met people who like their nurses. I've met people who like their pharmacists. Met people who like their physical therapists. What they want is access to health care. And we just need to be clear about what Medicare for All is all about. Instead of paying premiums into insurance companies and then having insurance companies build their profits by saying no to coverage. We're going to do this by saying everyone is covered by Medicare for All. Every health care provider is covered. And the only question here in terms of difference is where to send the bill.
Senator Sanders.
Let us be clear, Joe. In the United States of America, we are spending twice as much per capita on health care as the Canadians or any other major country on earth.
Uh-oh.
America.
Am I still here?
Yeah, but Americans don't want to pay twice as much as other countries.
Because they shut me down.
And they guarantee health care to all people. Under my Medicare for All proposal, when you don't pay out of pocket and you don't pay premiums, maybe you have run into people who love their premiums. I haven't. What people want is cost-effective health care. Medicare for All will save the average American substantial sums of money on his or her health care bill.
Senator Klobuchar, you said in your opening statement you want to represent the people stuck in the middle of the extremes. Who represents the extreme on this stage?
Let's find out.
I think you know that I don't agree with some of these proposals up here, George. So I'm talking
Which
about
ones?
if I could respond to some of the proposals from my friends.
All right.
First of all, Senator Sanders and I have worked valiantly
we're
to bring
getting
down
buffering.
the cost of pharmaceuticals. That was a Klobuchar-Sanders amendment to allow for drugs to come in from less expensive countries like Canada. We have worked to bring down the cost by fighting to allow
How is it
43
this point?
million seniors. That's a bill I lead.
Looks like it's
to
stuttering a lot
negotiate
to
for
me.
better prices under Medicare. I figure that's a lot of seniors, and they should be allowed to get a better price. But when it comes to our health care and when it comes to our premiums, I go with the doctor's creed, which is do no harm. And while Bernie wrote the bill, I read the bill. And on page 8 of the bill, it says that we will no longer have private insurance as we know it. And that
Good.
means that 149 million Americans will no longer be able to have their current insurance. That's in 4 years.
Amy,
I don't think that's a bold
that's
idea.
the plan.
I think it's a bad idea. And what I favor is something that what Barack Obama wanted to do from the very beginning, and that is a public option, a nonprofit choice that will bring down the cost of insurance, cover 12 million more people, and bring down the
I want to do a
prices for
thing.
13 million more
Okay,
people.
this thing will do a thing, though.
Senator Warren.
Yeah.
Page 8 of the bill, she says 149 people will lose their health insurance.
I'm sorry.
She said page 8 of the bill, 149 people will lose their health insurance.
Look,
Current health insurance.
149 million.
Million, excuse me.
so let's be clear about this. People will have access to all of their doctors, all of their nurses, their community hospitals, their rural hospitals. Doctors won't have to hire people to fill out crazy forms. They won't have to spend time on the phone arguing with insurance companies. People who have sick family members won't have to get into these battles. What this is about is making sure that we have the most efficient way possible to pay for
Yeah, I
health
found there
care
was
for everyone
another
in this
window
country.
open that was
Insurance
restreaming it back at me,
companies
so
last year
I went ahead and closed that.
$23 billion in profits out of the system. How did they make that money? Every one of those $23 billion was made by an insurance company saying no to your health care coverage.
Mayor Buttigieg.
The problem, Senator Sanders, with that damn bill that you wrote and that Senator Warren backs is that it doesn't trust the American people. I trust you to choose what makes the most sense for you, not my way or the highway. Now, look, I think we do have to go far
So
beyond tinkering
our
with the
choices
ACA.
are
I
between
propose
shitty insurance and
Medicare
other different
for
shitty
all who
insurance?
want it. We take a
Man.
version of Medicare, we make it available for the American people, and if we're right as progressives that that public alternative is better, then the American people will figure that out for themselves. I trust the American people to make the right choice for them. Why don't you?
Senator Sanders, 45 seconds.
George, you talked about, was it 150 million people on private insurance? 50 million of those people lose their private insurance every year when they quit their jobs, or when they go unemployed, or their employer changes their insurance policy. Medicare for All is comprehensive health care, covers all basic needs, including home health care. It allows you to go
No,
to any
don't worry.
doctor you want.
A little ranting's fine in my chat.
Insurance company programs do not. So
Gives me
if
some-
you want
gives me something else to bounce
comprehensive
off.
Healthcare, freedom of choice regarding doctor or hospital, no more than $200 a year for prescription drugs, taking on the drug companies and the insurance companies, moving to Medicare for all is the way to go.
Senator Harris, you started out co-sponsoring Senator Sanders' bill. You now say you're uncomfortable with it. Why?
I want to give credit first to Barack Obama for really bringing us this far. We would not be here if he hadn't the courage.
Okay, but
the
Obama's not
talent, or
here.
the will to see us this far.
What are you
I
going to
wanna
be
give
doing?
credit to Bernie. Take credit, Bernie. You know, you brought us this far in Medicare for All. I support Medicare for All, I always have, but I wanted to make the plan better, which I did, which is about offering people choice, not taking that from them. So under my Medicare for All plan, people have the choice of a private plan or a public plan because that's what people want. And I agree we shouldn't take choice from people. But here's the thing.
There's some staticky-ness.
Everybody on this stage, I do believe,
I hear it too.
is well-intentioned and wants that all Americans have coverage and recognizes that right now 30 million Americans don't have coverage. But at least 5 people have talked, some repeatedly, on this subject, and not once have we talked about Donald Trump. So let's talk about the fact that Donald Trump came into office and spent almost the entire
Hey-o.
first year of his term.
Sorry if there's
trying to get
some
rid of the
weird sound
Affordable
issue
Care
here.
Act. We all fought against it, and then McCain, at that
Okay, it is
moment,
from
at
the
about
video.
2 o'clock in the morning, killed his attempt to take health care from millions of people in this country. Fast forward to today, and what is happening? Donald Trump's Department
a
of
little
Justice
confused what to do here.
is trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump's
You're hearing that too, guys, right?
administration is trying to get rid of the ban that we placed on denying people who have pre-existing conditions coverage. Donald Trump is trying to say that our kids up to the age of 26 can no longer be on our plans. And frankly, I think this discussion has given the American public a headache. What they want to know is that they're going to have health care and cost will not be a barrier to getting it. But let's focus on the end goal. If we don't get Donald Trump out of office, he's going to get rid of all of it.
George,
question,
15
Congress-
seconds.
I'm going to check something real quick. I'm going to be quiet for
Let me
myself.
get to Congressman O'Rourke and then bring you. Go ahead, Mr. Vice
15
President.
seconds. Look, everybody says we want an option. The option I'm proposing is a Medicare for all, Medicare for choice. If you want Medicare, if you lose the job,
So apparently the issue is actually
from your employer, you automatically can
like
buy
my,
into this. You don't have no
microphone,
pre-existing
my
conditions to
speakers,
stop you
maybe?
from buying in. You get covered, period. And if you notice, nobody's yet said how much it's going to cost the taxpayer. I hear this large savings. The president my friend from Vermont thinks that the employer is going to give you back if you negotiate his union all these years, got a cut in wages because you got insurance. They're going to give back that money to the employee?
Matter of fact, they will.
Well, let me tell you
bill.
something. For a socialist, you
Please.
got for a socialist, you got
Single
a lot more
payer
confidence in
basically
corporate America
brings the
than I do.
cost entirely through the government, while a subsidized public option has relatively increased overhead in comparison, because you have to have the public option administration handling the things basically like a normal insurance company. What more are you going to have the other insurance companies that are trying to directly undermine that public option in various fashions? For instance, intentionally driving up costs at hospitals, and they'll pay for it, but the increased cost of the public option will be basically driving the program
Every single person
to
who's
bankruptcy.
diagnosed with cancer or any other disease can automatically become part of this plan. They will not go bankrupt because of that. They
Also,
will
it
not go
reduces
bankrupt
the
because of that. They
need
can
for people
join
to be having
immediately.
to
And we're
deal with the whole
talking 4,
subsidies
6,
and things
8,
like
10
that.
years, depending you talk about, before
Streamlined
we get
system.
to Medicare for all. Come on. I've been there. You've been there. You know what it's like. People need help now, hope now, and do something now.
Congressman O'Rourke.
Yeah.
I may have killed my microphone.
Thank you. Listen, I'm grateful that we all agree about the urgency of this challenge
Okay, that
and the
fixed
fact
my
that
static
Donald
issue.
Trump is undermining the limited protections that we have right now. But I also think we're being offered a false choice between those who propose an all-or-nothing gambit forcing tens of millions off of insurance that they like, that
Is
works
the
for them,
weird sound
forcing them
gone
on
now? I
Medicare,
hope it is.
and
It's
others
gone
who
on my
want to,
end.
as the Vice President does, incrementally improve what we have, which will still leave many, maybe millions, uninsured and uncared for in a state like Texas, where the largest provider of mental health care services is the county
Indeed,
jail
it,
system. We've got to do better.
allows
In my
better
proposal,
price,
Medicare for America says everyone who's
controls
uninsured
overall.
will be enrolled in Medicare. Everyone who's insufficiently insured, cannot afford it, can move over to Medicare. And those, like members of unions who fought for the health care plans that work for them and their families, are able to keep them. That is
This
the
is-
best possible path forward.
This is healthcare is the top issue for everyone in the country. I want to make sure everyone gets 1 minute to respond. So Secretary Castro, Andrew Yang, and then Senator Booker, you all get a minute.
Thank you. And, I also want to recognize the work that Bernie has done on this. And, of course, we owe a debt of gratitude to President Barack Obama. Of course, I also work for President Obama, Vice President Biden, and I know that the problem with your plan is that it leaves
For
10 million people
for a
uncovered.
time,
Now,
yes,
on
it
the
would
last
do
debate stage in Detroit, you said that wasn't
about
true,
the same
and
sort
Senator
of
Harris brought that
thing.
up. There was a fact check of that, and they said that was true. I
But
grew
as I
up
said,
with a grandmother
the
who
problem
had type
comes
2
with
diabetes, and I watched her
the
condition
private
get worse and
insurance
worse.
will then
But that whole
basically
time she had
work
Medicare.
to for
I
the
want
temporary
every single
and
American family
drive up
to
hospital
have a
costs
strong
in order to
Medicare
drive the
plan
public
available.
option basically out of money.
If they choose to hold on to strong, solid private health insurance, I believe they should be able to do that. But the difference between what
And so
I
if you were,
support
say,
and
a
what you
private
support,
insurance
Vice
company that
President
didn't want there to be a
Biden,
public
is that you
option at
require them
all,
to
that's what
opt
you would
in.
do.
And I would not require them to opt in. They would automatically be enrolled. They wouldn't have to buy in. That's a big difference, because Barack Obama's vision was not to leave 10 million people uncovered. He wanted every single person in this country covered. My plan would do that. Your plan would not.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
To buy in. If she qualifies for
Are you
Medicaid,
forgetting what you
she'd
said 2 minutes
automatically
ago?
be in for it.
Are you forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago? I mean, I can't believe that you said 2 minutes ago that they had to buy in, and now you're saying they don't have to buy. You're forgetting that.
I said anyone
I mean,
like your
look,
grandmother who has no money.
we need a healthcare system
You're automatically
that
enrolled.
automatically enrolls people regardless of whether they choose to opt in or not. If you lose your job, for instance, his healthcare plan would not automatically enroll you. You would have to opt in. My healthcare plan would. That's a big difference. I'm fulfilling the legacy of Barack Obama, and you're not.
I'll be surprised to him.
Andrew Yang.
This is why presidential debates are becoming unwatchable.
Yeah,
This
we're on the same
reminds
team.
everybody of what they cannot stand about Washington. Scoring points against each other, poking at each other, and telling each
Pete,
other
it's
that
Yang's turn.
my plan, your plan. Look, we all
That's
have
called a
different
Democratic
visions for
primary
what is
election.
better
Pete,
about
that's
our
called an election. That's an election. You know, this is what we're here for. It's an election.
Yeah, but a house divided cannot stand. And that is not how we're
Look, everyone, we know we're
Yeah,
on the
if
same team
the
here.
public
We know we're
option
on the same
is
team.
everything we can get,
all
I'll
have a better
take it.
vision for healthcare
But I
than
want
the
so
current
much
president.
more than that.
And I believe we're talking about this the wrong way. As someone who has run a business, I know that our current healthcare system makes it harder to hire people, makes it harder to give them benefits and treat them as full-time employees. You instead pretend they're contractors. It's harder to change jobs. It's certainly harder to start a business. The pitch we have to make to the American people is we will get the healthcare weight off of your backs and then unleash the hopes and dreams of the American people.
Senator Booker.
Now, I am Asian, so I know a lot of doctors, and they tell me that they spend a lot of time on
That's a weird line.
avoiding being sued, and navigating the insurance bureaucracy. We have to change the incentives so instead of revenue and activity, people are focused on our health in the healthcare system. And the Cleveland Clinic, where they're paid not based upon how many procedures they prescribe, shocker, they prescribe fewer procedures, and patient health stays the same or improves. That is the pitch to the American people.
Senator Booker, close out this discussion.
Thank you very much. Look, there are a lot of people watching at home right now, listening to us, that are afraid because they are in crisis. They don't have health insurance. Their health insurance doesn't go far enough. They can't afford their prescription drugs. Look, I'm clear in what I believe. I believe in Medicare for all. I believe it's the best way to rationalize the system. But dear God, I know that every one of my colleagues on this stage is in favor of universal health coverage and comes at this with the best of intentions. And I'll tell you, there is an urgency right now in this nation. Everybody feels it. And as a person who has an ideal, I know we cannot
he had his
sacrifice
opening statements.
progress on the altar of purity. Because people in my community, they need help right now. They have high blood pressure right now. They have unaffordable insulin right now. And this must be a moment where we as Democrats can begin to show that we can not only stake and stand our ground, but find common ground, because we've got one shot to make Donald Trump a one-term president. And we cannot lose it by the way we talk about each other or demonize and degrade each other. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. If I am the leader, I will work towards the ideal of health insurance, health coverage being a right for all Americans, but every single day,
Booker's,
I'll join
some of
with
your
other
stuff you're
Democrats
saying,
to make
I kind of
progress
agree with, but some of your stuff
in
is
our
really
nation
kind of
for the
awkward.
people that are struggling and suffering today.
Candidates, thank you. Lindsay Davis.
Thanks, George. Since we're here at an HBCU, I'd like
Editing's
to start
getting a
with
little
young
weird
black
here.
voters. Several recent polls
Hope you don't mind, I've been
indicate
poking at my
their
map stuff here.
number one concern is racism. This campus, this state, and this nation are still raw from that racially motivated attack on Latinos in El Paso. Now, we know that the racial divide started long before President Trump and President Obama, but each of you on this stage has said that President Trump has made that divide worse. Congressman O'Rourke, coming to you first, why are you the most qualified candidate to address this divide?
You know, I called this out in no uncertain terms on August 3rd and every day since then, and I was talking about it long before then as well. Racism in America is endemic. It is foundational. We can mark the creation of this country not at the 4th of July, 1776, but August 20th, 1619, when the first kidnapped African was brought to this country against his will and in bondage.
It's always kind of awkward to clap at things like that. I guess applaud you for knowing this and identifying it. But jeepers, it's a horrible thing.
Fully participate in and enjoy. We have to be able to answer this challenge, and it is found in our education system, where in Texas, a 5-year-old child in kindergarten is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled based on the color of their skin. In our healthcare system, where there's a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color, or the fact that there's 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. I'm going to follow Sheila Jackson Lee's lead and sign into law a reparations bill that will allow us to address this at its foundations. But we will also call out the fact that we have a white supremacist in the White House, and he poses a mortal threat to people of color all across this country.
Secretary Castro, 45 seconds to respond.
You know, and I want to commend Beto for how well he has spoken to the passion and the frustration and the sadness after what happened in his hometown of El Paso. He's done a great job with that. Look, a few weeks ago, a shooter drove 10 hours inspired by this president to kill people who look like me and people who look like my family. White supremacy is a growing threat to this country, and we have to root it out. I'm proud that I put forward a plan to disarm hate. I'm also proud that I was the first to put forward a police reform plan, because we're not going to have any more Laquan McDonald's or Eric Garners or Michael Browns or Pamela Turners or Walter Scott's or Sandra Bland here from the Houston area. We need to root out racism, and I believe that we can do that, because that doesn't represent the vast majority of Americans who do have a good heart. They also need a leader to match that, and I will be a president that matches that.
Senator Booker,
stay safe there, Ricochet.
The real question isn't who is or isn't a racist. It's who's going to do something about it. Senator, what do you plan to do about it?
Well, first and foremost, I want to hit that point, because we know Donald Trump's a racist, but there is no red badge of courage for calling him that. When racism exists, the question isn't who isn't a racist, it's who is and isn't doing something about racism. And this is not just an issue that started yesterday. It's not just an issue that we hear a president that can't condemn white supremacy. We have systemic racism that is eroding our nation, from healthcare to the criminal justice system. And it's nice to go all the way back to slavery, but dear God, we have a criminal justice system that is so racially biased. We have more African Americans under criminal supervision today than all the slaves in 1850. We have to come at this issue attacking systemic racism, having the courage to call it out, and having a plan to do something about it. If I am president of the United States, we will create an office in the White House to deal with the problem of white supremacy and hate crimes. And we will make sure that systemic racism is dealt with.
Yeah, this is a special office, guessing probably not cabinet level.
The disparities in healthcare to even one that we don't talk about enough, which is the racism that we see in environmental injustice in communities of color all around this country.
Mayor Buttigieg, you've been struggling with issues around race in your own community. You've also said that anyone who votes to re-elect President Trump is at best looking the other way on racism. Does that sort of talk alienate voters and potentially
Georgia
deepen
thing there.
divisions in our country?
Yeah,
I believe what's deepened divisions in the country is the conduct of this president.
things like
and
that
we have a
have been
chance
happening
to
and
change
keep
all of that.
happening,
Look,
and
systemic
some of them
racism
definitely get
preceded
more
this president,
notice
and
in
even
national
when we
media than
defeat him,
others.
it will be with
But
us. That's
either
why we
way,
need a systemic
do stay safe. If it's your own neighborhood, feel
It's
free
not
to
enough to just take
play
a
defensive.
racist policy, replace
Because
it
a lot of
with
these folks are
neutral
going
one,
in this
and expect
communities
things
in
will
order to
just
basically
get
disrupt
better
the
on their
communities
own.
and to intimidate the
Harms
people that live
compound
there.
in the same way that a
And it
dollar
isn't,
saves
for
so
anything
does a
they
dollar
usually
stolen.
claim
And
it
we know
is.
that the generational theft of the descendants of slaves is part of why everything from housing to education to health to employment basically puts us in two different countries. I have proposed the most comprehensive vision to tackle systemic racism in every one of these areas, marshaling as many resources as went into the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe, but this time a Douglas Plan that we invest right here at home, to make sure that we're not only dealing with things like the over-incarceration of black Americans, but also black solutions, entrepreneurship, raising to 25% the target for the federal government to do business with minority-owned businesses, investing in HBCUs that are training and educating the next generation of entrepreneurs. We can and must do that, but that means transcending this framework that pits us against each other, that pits a single black mother of three against a displaced auto worker. Because where I come from, a lot of times that displaced auto worker is a single black mother of three. We've got to say that and bring people together.
Also a concern for people of color is criminal justice reform. Senator Harris, you released your plan for that just this week, and it does contradict some of your prior positions. Among them, you used to oppose the legalization of marijuana, now you don't. You used to oppose outside investigations of police shootings, now you don't. You've said that you changed on these and other things because you were, quote, swimming against the current, and thankfully the currents have changed. But when you had the power, why didn't you try to effect change then?
That's a very good question, Harris.
I'm glad you asked me this question, and there have been many distortions of my record. Let me be very clear. I made a decision to become a prosecutor for two reasons. One, I've always wanted to protect people and keep them safe. And second, I was born knowing
the U.S.
about how
map
this
is
criminal
the
justice
2016
system in America
primary
has
election.
worked in a way that has been informed by racial
The
bias.
center
And
one
I could
is
tell
the
you
Union with
extensively
Dennis,
about the
and the ones on the
experiences
right
I and my
are
family
the
members have personally
historical
had.
project
But
thing
I
I've been
made a
working on with them.
decision that if I was going to have the ability to reform the system, I would try to do it from the inside. And so I took on the position that allowed me, without asking permission, to create one of the first in the nation initiatives that was a model and became a national model around people who were arrested for drugs and getting them jobs. I created one of the first in the nation requirements that a state law enforcement agency would have to wear cameras and keep them on full time. I created one of the first in the nation trainings for police officers on the issue of racial bias and the need to reform the system. Was I able to get enough done? Absolutely not. But my plan has been described by activists as being a bold and comprehensive plan that is about ending mass incarceration, about taking the profit out of the criminal justice system. I plan on shutting down for-profit prisons on day one. It will be
Hooray, you're
about
back.
what we need to do
Am I back?
to hold law enforcement,
Am I
including
here?
prosecutors,
What am I
accountable.
doing?
And finally, my plan is about making sure that in America's criminal justice system, we de-incarcerate women and children, that we end solitary confinement, and that we work on keeping families intact. And as President of the United States, knowing the system from the inside, I will have the ability to be an effective leader and get this job complete.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Senator Klobuchar.
There's knowing system from the inside and being, I guess,
black men were killed by police.
complicit?
Critics say that too often you sided with police in these cases. The ACLU's legal director in Minnesota has said that you showed no interest in racial justice. Do you wish now that you had done more?
That's not my record. We are here at a historically black college. And I think of an alum of that college, Barbara Jordan, and something that she once said. She said, what the people want is simple. They want a country.
Well, if I change a resolution on my end, I'll have to pause the stream.
The criminal justice system. So when I was there, the way we handled these police shootings, I actually took a stand to make sure outside investigators handled them. I took on our major police chief in Minneapolis, but in the prosecutor's office, they were handled with the grand jury. That's how they were all handled across our state. I now believe it is better for accountability if the prosecutor handles them and makes those decisions herself. That aside, I am proud of the work our staff did, 400 people in our office. The cases that came to us, the African-American community that came to us, they said there was no justice for their little kids. There was a kid named Byron Phillips that was shot on his front porch. No one had bothered to figure out who did it. When I came into that office, we worked with the community groups, we put up billboards, we found the shooter, and we put him in jail. We did the same for the killer of a little girl named Taisha Edwards, who was doing her homework at her kitchen table and was shot through the window. What changes did we make? Go after white-collar crimes in a big way.
Well, at least the audio's there, right?
In a big way. Work with the Innocence Project to make sure we do much better with eyewitness ID. And as a senator and as your president, I will make sure that we don't just do the First Step Act when it comes to criminal sentencing, that we move to the Second Step Act, which means the 90% of people that are incarcerated in local and state jails, let's reduce those sentences for nonviolent offenders, and let's get them jobs and let them vote when they get out of prison.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. You all believe that the war on drugs has put too many Americans behind bars. Vice President Biden, you have a plan to release many nonviolent drug offenders from prison. Senator Booker says that your plan is not ambitious enough. Your response?
Well, first of all, let me say that when I came back from law school, I had a job with a big-time law firm. Right. I left and became a public defender because my state was under siege when Dr. King was assassinated.
Maybe it comes down to who we're looking at.
By the National Guard for 10 months.
We're looking at Amy or Joe. Perhaps everything's smooth.
I introduced legislation to try to keep them putting a
I'll have
sewer
to keep an eye on that.
I made sure that we dealt with redlining. Banks should have to lend where they operate, et cetera. The fact of the matter is that what's happened is that we're in a situation now where there are so many people who are in jail and shouldn't be in jail. The whole means by which this should change is the whole model has to change. We should be talking about rehabilitation. Nobody should be in jail for a nonviolent crime. As when we were in the White House, we released 36,000 people from the federal prison system. Nobody should be in jail for a drug problem. They should be going directly to a rehabilitation. We build more rehabilitation centers, not prisons. I'm the guy that put
So, Joe, what about the people in prison now? I think that was what the question was about.
Justice system. And so we have to change the whole way we look at this. When we put people in prison, we have to equip them when they get out. Nobody who got in prison for marijuana, for example, immediately upon being released, they shouldn't be in there for that should be a misdemeanor. They should be out and their record should be expunged. Every single right should be returned. When you finish your term in prison, you should be able not only vote, but have access to Pell Grants, have access to be able to get housing, have access to be able to move along the way. I've laid out a detailed plan along those lines. And the fact is we've learned so much more.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senator Booker, 45 seconds to respond.
Our criminal justice system is so savagely broken. There's no difference in America between blacks, whites, and Latinos for using drugs or dealing drugs. But if you're African American, you're almost 4 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated, destroying your lives. And so much of this comes down to privilege. We have a criminal justice system that Brian Stevenson says treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And so I have challenged this whole field We can specifically and demonstratively now show that there are 17,000 people unjustly incarcerated in America, and all of us should come forward and say, when we are president of the United States, when I am president of the United States,
I know there's a delay here, but I just read your
I joined together and led in the United States
comment,
Senate,
Matt.
the only major bipartisan bill passed under this president for criminal justice reform that has already led to thousands of people coming out of jail.
Yeah,
if
we're
87 members of the United
like
States Senate
30
says
seconds
that
or
these
more
sentences
behind.
are way too long, and we changed
So if I
it, but we didn't
start
make it
saying things in
retroactive,
chat that don't
we
make
can
any
literally
sense
point to
because
the
I'm
people that are in jail
start responding
unjustly
things in
right
chat,
now.
that's what's going on.
Everyone on this stage should say that we are going to give clemency to these 17,000 people, and I challenge you, don't just say big statements, back it up with details of the people in prison right now looking for one of the most sacrosanct ideals of this nation, which is liberty and freedom. We need to reform this system, and we must do it now. Every day we wait is too long.
Stop moving your cameras around,
I want
guys.
to turn to the deadly mass shootings here in this country, and of course we are all mindful tonight of where we stand. We are here in Texas tonight, where 29 people have lost their lives in just the last month alone. El Paso, which we've discussed.
Well,
Odessa,
29
and I
people
know
in
there are
the big
survivors
mass
in El
shootings.
Paso
There's also
right
lots of
here in
other
the hall
shootings.
tonight. Vice President Biden, I do want to direct this
But
to you.
they don't
because
get
we
as much
all remember
notice, too.
Sandy Hook. 26 people died in that school, 20 of them children. Those first graders would be in 8th grade today. At the time, there was a groundswell in this country to get something done. President Obama asked you to lead the push for gun control. You have often pointed to your ability to reach across the aisle to get things done. But 4 months after Sandy Hook, a measure to require expanded background checks died on the Senate floor. If you couldn't get it done after Sandy Hook, why should voters give you another chance?
Because it got done before. I'm the only one up here who's ever beat the NRA. Only one ever beat the NRA nationally. I'm the guy that brought the Brady Bill into
Everyone's like,
and became
yeah,
law.
Joe.
And so that's number one.
Yeah,
Number
Joe's
two,
not any
after
use on
Sandy
this
Hook,
issue. We want to
a number of
speak.
things happened. It went from a cause to a movement. Look what's happened now. Mothers, the organization, Mothers Against Violence, gun violence. We've seen what's happened again. Now we have all these young people marching on Washington, making sure that things are going to change. There has been a sea change. Those proposals I put forward for the president had over 50% of members of the NRA supporting them, and overwhelmingly the rest of the people supporting them. Now the numbers are much higher because they realize what I've been saying and we've all been saying is correct. Over 90% of the American people think we have to get assault weapons off the street, period. And we have to get buybacks and get them out of their basements. So the point is, things have changed, and things have changed a lot. And now what's happening is, and by the way Beto handled, excuse me for saying Beto, what Congressman...
That's all right. That does good.
The way he handled what happened in his hometown is meaningful. To look in the eyes of those people, to see those kids, to understand those parents, you understand the heartache.
But this is
we
the
are
problem.
ready to do this.
Mr. Vice President, thank you.
Joe, the way you pass gun reform is to first get rid of the biggest block in the way. And that requires you to not just beat President Trump, you need to crush the Republican Party in the Senate.
Your first 100 days, including banning imports of AR-15 assault weapons.
That's right.
President Obama, after Sandy Hook, more than 23 executive actions, and yet here we all are today. In recent days, former Vice President Biden has said about executive orders, some really talented people are seeking the nomination. They said, I'm going to issue an executive order. Biden saying there's no constitutional authority to issue that executive order when they say I'm going to eliminate assault weapons, saying you can't do it by executive order any more than Trump can do things when he says he can do it by executive order. Does the Vice President have a point?
Uh-oh.
Some things you can't.
Audio skipping too.
Many things you can't.
No.
Let the senator answer.
Well, I mean, I would just say, hey, Joe, instead of saying no, we can't, let's say yes, we can.
Let's be constitutional. We got a constitution.
And yes, we can, because I'll tell you something. The way that I think about this is I've seen more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. I have attended more police officer funerals than I care to tell you. I have hugged more mothers of homicide victims than I care to tell you. And the idea that we would wait for this Congress, which has just done nothing, to act is just, it is overlooking the fact that every day in America, our babies are going to school to have drills, elementary, middle, and high school students, where they are learning about how they have to hide in a closet or crouch in a corner if there is a mass shooter roaming the hallways of their school. I was talking about this at one of my town halls, and this child, it was 8 years old probably, came up to me. It was like it was a secret between the two of us, and he tugged on my jacket and he said, "I had to have one of those drills." It is traumatizing our children. El Paso and Beto, God love you for standing so courageously in the midst of that tragedy. You know, people asked me in El Paso, they said, you know, because I have a long-standing record on this issue, they said, well, do you think Trump
Yeah,
is
I'm not
responsible
interested
for
in
what
any Trump
happened?
people
And I
today.
said, well, look, I mean, obviously he didn't pull the trigger, but he's certainly been tweeting out the ammunition.
Senator Harris, thank you. Vice President Biden, do you still stand by what you said on an executive
What I
order?
said was, the question, speak to constitutional scholars. If, in fact, we could say, by the way, you can't own the following weapons, period. They cannot be sold anymore. Check with constitutional scholars. Now, you
Mr. Vice
can't
President,
say-
thank you.
Could I tell
Congressman
you what you
O'Rourke, I
could
want to
do
come to you on
in 100
this.
days?
I'm going to work down the row here, but I do want to come to Congressman O'Rourke because I know this is personal to you. El Paso is your hometown. Some on this stage have suggested a voluntary buyback for guns in this country. You've gone further. You said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AK-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. You know the critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am, if it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield. If the high impact, high velocity round, when it hits your body, shreds everything inside of your body because it was designed to do that so that you would bleed to death on a battlefield and not be able to get up and kill one of our soldiers. When we see that being used against children, and in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes,
Oh,
we're gonna
they
take
most
your
certainly train
AR-15, your
the
AK-47.
active shooters as well as they train the children. It's basically encouraging an arms race.
I'm
Yeah,
listening
to
to the
use a
people
metaphor.
of this country. The day after I proposed doing that, I went to a gun show in Conway, Arkansas, to meet with those who are selling AR-15s and AK-47s and those who are buying those weapons. And you might be surprised, there was some common ground there. Folks who said, I would willingly give that up, cut it to pieces. I don't need this weapon to hunt, to defend myself. It is a weapon of war. So let's do the right thing, but let's bring everyone in America into the conversation. Republicans, Democrats, gun owners, and non-gun owners alike.
Make a point. Congressman, thank you. I want to bring in Senator Klobuchar on this because you've often talked about your uncle and the proud hunters back home in Minnesota. So I wanted to get your response to Congressman O'Rourke tonight. Where do you stand on mandatory gun buybacks?
I so appreciate what the congressman's
Hey, Winter.
been doing, and I want to remind people here that what unites us is so much bigger than what divides us. Everyone up here favors
Hey,
an assault weapon
Hoxton
ban.
and
Everyone up here
Sci-Fi
favors
channels.
magazine limitations, which, by the way, would have made a huge difference if that was in place in El Paso in that store where
Very
all
curious
those
you name you have
ordinary
there.
people showed such extraordinary courage. And certainly in Dayton, Ohio, where in 30 seconds, one man guns down innocent people. The cops got there in 1 minute, and it still wasn't enough to save those people. That's what unites us. You know what else unites us?
The way
And I'll
the
tell you
place
this.
in Dayton
What
there, that's a
unites
place
us
I've actually
is that
been.
right now,
And
on
yeah,
Mitch McConnell's desk are three
it's like
bills.
I move out of the area
Universal
and then
background
all
checks,
this horrible stuff
closing
starts
the
happening.
Charleston loophole, and passing my bill to make sure that domestic abusers don't get AK-47.
Senator
So we
Klobuchar.
want to get something done. And I personally think we should start with a voluntary buyback program. That's what I think, David. But I want to finish this because if you want action now,
Amy, if
you want action
people
now,
are, if it's a voluntary
send a
buyback,
message
the people that
Mitch
want to
McConnell.
keep
We
their
can't
weapons of war
wait
to shoot a
until
bunch
one
of people
us gets
isn't
in
going
the
to be
White House. We
solving
have
that
to pass
problem.
those bills right now to get this done.
Senator
because we
Klobuchar.
cannot spare another innocent life.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to turn to Senator Booker because you have
It's a
said
nice
just this
talking
week
point, but
about
that's
guns
kind of all
and about
what
the
that one
candidates
is.
on this stage, that the differences do matter. Those were your words. You have argued if you need a license to drive a car in this country, you should have a license to buy a gun. Gun owners would not only have to pass a background check, they would have to obtain a federal license to buy a gun. This would require, as you know, Congress to pass legislation. If Democrats can't get universal background checks, how would you get this done? And can you name one Republican colleague of yours in the Senate right now who would be on board with this idea?
So background checks and gun licensing, these are agreed to by overwhelmingly the majority of Americans. 83% of Americans agree with licensing. This is the issue. Look, I grew up in the suburbs. It was about 20 years ago that I came out of my home when I moved to inner city Newark, New Jersey, and witnessed the aftermath of a shooting. It's one of the reasons why shooting after shooting after shooting in neighborhoods like mine for decades, this has been a crisis for me. It's why I was the first person to come out for gun licensing.
Oh yeah, of course I'm going to block you freedom or death because yeah, this is my stream, so no thank you.
But this is what I'm sorry about. I'm sorry that it had to take.
Yeah, you can
issues
speak.
coming to my
You
neighborhood
just
or personally affecting
don't expect to
veterans
be
suddenly
able to
make us
speak without
demand
consequences, especially in my domain. Ha 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 ha.
in our nation. We are never going to solve this crisis if we have to wait for it to personally affect us or our neighborhood or our community before we
Also,
demand
sock
action.
puppets.
You want to know how we get
Not even
this
once,
done?
man.
We get this done by having a more courageous empathy where people don't wait for this hell to visit upon their communities. They stand up and understand the truth of what King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I will lead change.
It's
on this
effectively
issue
a
because I
mute
have
button,
seen what the
and it just
carnage
does it
creates in
retroactively.
communities like mine, because we forget national shootings, these mass shootings are tragedies, but the majority of the homicide victims come from neighborhoods like mine. Nobody has ascended to the White House that will bring more personal passion on this issue. I will fight this and bring a fight.
Now
to the
everyone
NRA
knows
and the
their
corporate gun lobby
YouTube
that
handles.
they've never
Hooray!
seen before.
Senator Booker, thank you. A quick follow-up, though, because Americans watching tonight know the reality of Congress in Washington. I asked, do you have a Republican colleague in the Senate who would be on board with this idea to get this done?
You know, if that was the attitude when Strom Thurmond had the longest filibuster ever on civil rights, if it was this idea that we can't get it done because of the situation in the Senate, I'm looking to lead a movement. The number one reason why governments are formed is to protect the citizenry. Think about this. We have had more people die due to gun violence in my lifetime than every single war in this country combined from the Revolutionary War till now. This is not a side issue to me. It is a central issue to me. That is the kind of fight, because the majority of homicide victims, we have a mass shooting every single day in communities like mine. We must awaken a more courageous empathy in this country so that we stand together and fight together and overwhelm those Republicans who are not even representing their constituency. Because the majority of Americans, the majority of gun owners agree with me, not the corporate gun lobby. It is time for a movement on this issue, and I will lead it.
Senator Booker, thank you. Senator Warren, I want to come to you next, because you have actually said in recent days that there are things you can get done with Republicans in the Senate. What can you get done on gun control?
So let's start by framing the problem the right way. We have a gun violence problem in this country. The mass shootings are terrible, but they get all the headlines. Children die every day on streets, in neighborhoods, on playgrounds. People
I'd argue that being
violence
moderate
from suicide
or
and
left
domestic
or whatever,
abuse.
at the
We
end of the
have
day,
a gun
doesn't
violence
matter
problem in this country,
if you are
and we
unable to
agree
carry forth your
on many
message in a
steps we could
sane
take
and
to
responsible
fix it.
fashion.
My view on
And
this is
so,
it's not gonna
you
be
know,
one
when
and done
you
on
are
this. We're gonna do
in
it, and we're
a
gonna have to do it again, and we're gonna have to
environment
come
where
back some more
messaging
until we
is
cut the number of
basically
gun
king,
deaths
you
in
need to be
this
able to
country significantly.
make the
But
make the
here's
pitch,
the
and that
question we need
requires
to
a
ask
certain,
is when we've
I
got
guess,
this much support across the
I'm not
country,
trying to say
90% of Americans wanna see us do- I like
enthusiasm for what you're
registration.
doing,
Wanna
but
see
a
us do background checks, wanna get
trying to look for the right term here.
off the streets. Why doesn't it happen?
Well, we'll just
And
go with
the answer is
enthusiasm.
corruption,
That if you
pure
are
and simple.
100%
We have
behind whatever you are
Congress that is
believing in,
beholden
no matter
to the
where it
gun
is in the
industry.
political compass,
And
you are going to be more effective than someone who is taking on a position because it's more focused grouped and things like that. It is, with things that you believe this is what people want to hear.
Background checks. Let's get rid of
That's going to be, that sort of thing is going to be less effective.
54 senators, it failed because of the filibuster. Until we attack the systemic problems, we can't get gun reform in this country. We've got to go straight against the industry, and we've got to change Congress so it doesn't just work for the wealthy and well-connected, so it works for the people.
Senator Warren, thank you. You bring up eliminating the filibuster, which means you would need simply a simple majority in a Republican Senate to get something done. I want to turn to Senator Sanders on this, because you've said before of this, if Donald Trump supports ending the filibuster, which he's talked about himself, you should be nervous. Would you support ending the filibuster?
No, but what I would support absolutely is passing major legislation, the gun legislation that people here are talking about, Medicare for all, climate change legislation that saves the planet. I will not wait for 60 votes to make that happen. And you could do it in a variety of ways. You could do that through budget reconciliation law. You have a vice president who will, in fact, tell the Senate what is appropriate and what is not, what is in order and what is not. But I want to get back to a point that Elizabeth made, and that, in fact, in terms of gun issues, picking up on Corey and Beto and everybody else, what we are looking at is a corrupt political system. And that means whether it is the drug companies or the insurance companies or the fossil fuel industry determining what's happening in Washington, or in this case, you got an NRA which has intimidated the President of the United States and the Republican leadership. I am proud that year after year I had an F rating from the NRA. And as president, I will not be intimidated by the NRA.
Senator Sanders, thank you.
May I respond?
Can I?
We've been hearing a lot about what's been happening here in Texas.
I was to say,
only a few weeks ago.
Who is this voice from above? Oh, it's the guy.
Latinos in modern U.S. history happened in this state, in El Paso. So the fear among Latinos, and you know this, is very real. So let me start with an issue that is causing a lot of division in this country, immigration. Vice President Biden, as a presidential candidate in 2008, you supported the border wall, saying, unlike most Democrats, I voted for 700 miles of fence. This is what you said. Then you served as vice president in an administration that deported 3 million people, the most ever in U.S. history. Did you do anything to prevent those deportations?
Video to maintain smooth streaming.
Before and refused to answer, so let me try.
I don't know why he just keeps doing that.
Are you prepared to say tonight that you and President Obama made a mistake about deportations? Why should Latinos trust you?
What Latinos should look at is comparing this president to the president we have is outrageous, number one. We didn't lock people up in cages. We didn't separate families. We didn't do all of those things, number one. Number two, by the time this is the president who came along
trying to
with the
cut down
DACA
more
program. No one had ever
things
done
here that might be
before.
interfering.
This is the president sent a legislation
No
to
Google.
this saying he wants to find a pathway for the 11 million undocumented in the United States of America. This is the president who's done a great deal. So I'm proud to have served.
Kind of hoping
with
for
him.
a commercial
What I
break
would
here
do
so I
as
can
president
quickly
is several more things,
try to
because things have changed. I would in fact
fiddle with
make
things.
sure
0
that
kilobytes,
is-
what?
We immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come. I would change the order that the president just changed, saying women who were being beaten and abused could no longer claim that as a reason for asylum. And by the way, retrospectively, you know, the 25th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act is up. The Republican Congress has not reauthorized it. Let's put pressure on them to pass the Violence Against Women Act now. But then
Yeah,
we'll go
but
back.
you didn't answer the question.
Well,
The
I
question
did
is, did
answer
you
the
make
question.
did you make a mistake with those deportations?
Yeah, you did want to answer the
The
question.
president did the best thing that was able to be done at the time.
How about you?
I'm the vice president of the United States.
Secretary Castro, would you want to respond to Vice
look,
President Biden?
you know,
let me put this in context, because you're part
Now,
of
Joe, you
control
just kind of skipped the
White
entire
House and
question.
Congress in 2009 and didn't pass immigration reform. And this broke a promise made by President Barack Obama to Latinos. So why should voters trust Democrats now? I mean,
the filibuster is a double-edged sword.
You need Republican votes in
A
the
lot
Senate.
of,
So are you willing, for
but
instance, to give up
I would
DACA
argue that a lot of
or
the
give up a
issues
path
with the
to
Senate
citizenship, or even
would
agree to
be
build a wall in order to legalize
less of an issue if more
10.5
folks
million
took the midterm elections more
Jorge, thank you
seriously
very much for
in
that
general.
question. And, you look, I
Turnout for
agree
those
that Barack Obama
is
was very
generally
different from
abysmal.
Donald
Last
Trump. Donald
2018, they were
has
actually
a
pretty
dark
good.
heart when it
But
comes to immigrants.
2014,
He built his whole
2010,
political career so far on
yeah, it was
scapegoating
ridiculously
and
low
fear-mongering and
turnout.
underwriting
And so that's how
migrants. And
the
that's very
Republicans
different from
have
Barack
built
Obama.
up
But
a lot
my
of their
problem with
influence in the
Vice
Senate
President Biden,
over
and Corey pointed this out
numerous
last
cycles.
time, is every time something good about Barack Obama comes up, he says, "Oh, I was there, I was there, I was there. That's me too." And then every time somebody questions part of the administration that we were both part of, he says, "Well, that was the president." I mean, he wants to take credit for Obama's work, but not have to answer to any questions. I mean,
Vice President Biden, you have,
I don't get that.
you have 45 seconds.
Let me just say,
what I said.
let me just say that I was the first candidate in early April to put forward an immigration plan. You know why? Because I'm not afraid of Donald Trump on this issue. I'm not going to backpedal. I'm not going to pretend like I don't have my own vision for immigration. So we're not going to give up DACA. We're not going to give up protections for anybody. I believe that on January 20th, 2021,
I kinda need to go to the bathroom, guys.
We're going to throw out Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn.
I don't want to
We're gonna
leave you
have a
alone.
Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, and we're going to pass immigration reform within the first 100 days.
Vice President, 45 seconds.
I did not say I don't stand. I stand with Barack Obama all 8 years, good, bad, and indifferent. That's where I stand. I did not say I did not stand with him.
Okay, Senator Warren, hundreds of children have been separated from their parents at the border, and recently in Mississippi, we saw the largest immigration raid in a decade. You want to replace ICE, the agency in charge of rounding up undocumented immigrants. So how would you deal with the millions of immigrants who arrive legally but overstay their visas? And how would you stop hundreds of thousands of Central Americans who want to migrate to the U.S.?
Well, I start with a statement of principles, and that is, in this country, immigration does not make us weaker, immigration makes us stronger. I want to see us expand legal immigration and create a pathway to citizenship for our dreamers, but also for their grandparents and for their cousins, for people who overstayed student visas, and for people who came here to work in the fields. I want to have a system that is a path to citizenship that is fair and achievable. Down at the border, we've got to rework this entirely. A system right now that cannot tell the difference in the threat posed by a terrorist, a criminal, and a 12-year-old girl is not a system that is keeping us safer, and it is not serving our values.
Mr. Yang.
I want to add one more part on this, because I think we have to look at all the pieces. Why do we have a crisis at the border? In no small part because we have withdrawn help from people in Central America who are suffering.
Hello.
We need
Am I gone
to
again?
restore that help. We need to help establish and reestablish the rule of law so that people don't feel like they have
Or
to
just
flee
get to the
for
bit where I
their
need to go to the
lives.
bathroom.
We have a crisis that Donald Trump has created and hopes to profit from politically. We have to have the courage to stand up and fight back.
Mr. Yang, it is true that in the last few years we have seen the most severe anti-immigrant measures, from putting kids in cages to limiting asylum for people fleeing gangs and domestic violence. But it is also true that about 1 million immigrants enter the U.S. legally every year. So are you willing to raise the number of legal immigrants from 1 million to 2 million per year? And should there be a merit system, as President Trump wants?
So, yeah, I'm sorry, did you ask me or?
Mr. Yang.
I already said it, okay. Sorry.
My father grew up on a peanut farm in Asia with no floor, and now his son is running for president. That is the immigration story that we have to be able to share with the American people. If you look at our history, almost half of Fortune 500 companies were founded by their immigrants or children of immigrants, and rates of business formation are much higher in immigrant communities. We have to say to the American people, immigrants are positive for our economic and social dynamism, And I would return the level of legal immigration to the point it was under the Obama-Biden administration. I think we have to compete for talent, and I am the opposite of Donald Trump in many ways. He says build a wall. I'm going to say to immigrants, come to America, because if you come here, your son or daughter can run for president. The water is great, and this is where you want to build a company, build a family, and build a life.
The vote by mail system,
This country has
rat.
been a magnet for human capital for generations. If we lose that, we lose something integral to our continued success, and that is where I would lead as president.
Alcalde Pitt, tengo una pregunta para usted.
Gracias.
Alcalde Pitt, 8 out of 10 Latinos in Texas fear another mass shooting targeting them. This is according to a new Univision poll. President Trump has called Mexican immigrants rapists and killers, tried to ban Muslims from entering the country, and separated children from their parents. His supporters have chanted, build the wall and send her back. Do you think that people who support President Trump and his immigration policies are racist?
Anyone who supports this is supporting racism. Este es racismo y es sencillo. The only people, though, who actually buy into this president's hateful rhetoric around immigrants are people who don't know any. We have an opportunity to build an American majority around immigration reform. In my community, a group of conservative Republicans rallied around an individual, a beloved local individual who was deported when he went into ICE to try to get his paperwork sorted out, because they never thought it would happen to him. In some of the most conservative rural areas of Iowa, I have seen communities that embraced immigration grow, and it's why part of my plan for revitalizing the economies of rural America includes community renewal visas that would allow cities and towns and counties that are hurting not only for jobs but for population to embrace immigration as we have in my city. You know, the only reason that South Bend is growing right now, after years of shrinking, is immigration. It's one of the reasons we acted, not waiting for Washington, to create city-issued municipal IDs so that people, regardless of immigration status, in our city had the opportunity to have the benefits of identification. We have an opportunity to actually get something done, but we cannot allow this to continue to be the same debate with the same arguments and the same clever lines, often among the same people, since the last real reform happened in the 1980s. We have to actually engage
Thousands of years ago in the 1980s.
the opportunities for not just growth in small communities, but our values, values of welcome, values of faith that all argue for us to manage this humanely and in a way that marries our values with our laws.
Congresista Beto O'Rourke, una pregunta para usted. In an interview 8 months ago, you were asked what to do with the so-called overstayers, people who come with a visa and then stay. And you said, I don't know. Do you have an answer now?
I do, and if you read the rest of that article in the Washington Post, I talked about harmonizing our entry-exit system with Mexico in the same way that we do with Canada. I think that could help us to keep a handle on visa overstays, but I think the larger question that we're trying to get at is how do we rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, in the image of Houston, Texas, the most diverse city in the United States of America, in the image of El Paso, Texas, one of the safest cities in the United States of America, safe not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants, safe because we are a city of immigrants. Conocemos que si queremos asegurar nuestras comunidades y nuestro país, necesitamos tratar cada persona con respeto y dignidad. I will lead an effort to make sure that we rewrite our immigration laws in that way. Never cage another child. Make sure that there is accountability and justice for the 7 lives lost under our care and our custody, but also face the fact that Democrats and Republicans alike voted to build a wall that has produced thousands of deaths of people trying to cross to join family.
I'd argue that Texas is a swing state at this point. I'm someone who pays a lot of attention to polling and things like that, probably perhaps more than I should, and it's neck and neck.
The back foot. We have to lead on this issue because we know it is right. Legalize America. Begin with those more than 1 million dreamers. Make them U.S. citizens right now in their true home country, and extend that to their parents, their sisters, and their brothers, and ensure that we have a legal, safe, orderly system to come to this country and add to our greatness here.
Thank you, George.
Jorge, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back,
Finally, I can go to the bathroom, but first I'm going to restart the stream. So, experiencing interruption in a few moments here.
Texas Southern University, who are watching this just steps from where we are here on campus. That's where Pooja Lodia is with our affiliate KTRK. She's there with the students. Hey, Pooja, what's the reaction so far?
Well, Devin, we are seeing a lot of excitement, a lot of cheers out here. Actually, almost 2,000 students registered to be right here at TSU's official debate watch party. I would say the biggest cheers we've seen would
All right,
be
I think I'm
anytime
back
any one of the
streaming.
candidates have brought up historically black colleges and universities.
Hopefully.
We've also seen standing ovations for many of the times that those candidates have brought up former President Barack Obama. I want to go real quickly to a couple of students. Quick, tell me which candidates have impressed you the most tonight.
So far,
That
Bernie
might help with
Sanders,
the
and
stability
just
as well.
his proposal for,
Holy
Medicare
smokes,
for
actually
all,
might.
So that just really stood out to me.
Sure, and what about you?
I would have to agree, Bernie Sanders. I definitely believe that it's imperative for all citizens to have access to reliable and affordable health care. So.
Great, thank you so much. And schools and classes were actually canceled
For better or
today.
worse, a lot of
excitement and a lot of
interactions for some of the candidates hasn't been really to pitch their ideas, but having to
Pooja
play
Lodia with our
defense.
affiliate KTRK there with the students here at Texas Southern University, the first historically black college and university to host one of these debates. A lot of excitement here. We've seen clashes on healthcare, immigration, racism, and there at the end on the president's legacy, vice president's legacy rather, with President Obama. Much more ahead here in
Is
Texas.
this,
Stay with us.
this is a 3-hour
on ABC
debate,
News
right?
Live. Our full political team will be standing by after the debate, and we'll send you back now to the debate hall. The debate continues here right now.
Oh no, we got commercials. Let's mute it so it doesn't screw things up. Yeah, they've had a Rahm Emanuel on some of the in between bits there, and I can't. That's one of those guys I just wish would just go away. All right, we're back. I think.
Has such a direct impact here at home. The U.S.
Yeah.
relationship with China, trade, and
Just more
President
commercials.
Trump's
Don't mind us.
We received more than 100 questions from viewers wanting to know how all of you are going to handle these tariffs. And Mr. Yang, let me begin with you. Would you repeal the tariffs on your first day in office? And if so, would you risk losing leverage in our trade relationship with China?
I would not repeal the tariffs on day one, but I would let the Chinese know that we need to hammer out a deal, because right now the tariffs are pummeling producers and farmers in Iowa who have absolutely nothing to do with the imbalances that we have with China. A CEO friend of mine was in China recently, and he said that he saw pirated U.S. intellectual property on worker workstations to the tune of thousands of dollars per head. And he said, one, how can my workers compete against that? And two, think about all the lost revenue to American companies. So the imbalances are real, but we have to let the Chinese
Well, if
know
we're talking about
that we
Photoshop,
recognize that President Trump has pursued an arbitrary and haphazard trade policy that has had victims on both sides. So no to repealing the tariffs immediately, but yes to making sure we come to a deal that addresses the concerns of American companies and American producers.
Mayor Pete, let me take that question. Let me take that question to you, because if you've seen President Trump's tweets, he says what's going to happen here is the Chinese are just going to wait him out so they can get a Democrat who they can take advantage of. How do you think about China? We've seen President Trump call President Xi both an enemy and a friend.
Well, the president clearly has no strategy. You know, when I first got into this race, I remember President Trump scoffed and said he'd like to see me making a deal with Xi Jinping. I'd like to see him making a deal with Xi Jinping. Is it just me, or was that supposed to happen in like April? It's one more example of a commitment not made. When that happens on the international stage, people take note. Not just our competitors, our adversaries, but also our allies take note of the inability of the United States to keep its word or follow through on its plans. And when that happens, there are serious consequences. We saw it at the G7. The leaders of some of the greatest powers and economies of the world sitting to talk about one of the greatest challenges in the world, climate change, and there was literally an empty chair where American leadership could have been. The problem is, this is a moment when American leadership is needed more than ever, whether it's in Hong Kong, where those protesters for democracy need to know that they have a friend in the United States, or anywhere around the world where increasingly we see dictators throwing their weight around. The world needs America, but it can't be just any America.
Would you repeal the tariffs?
I would have a strategy that would include the tariffs as leverage, but it's not about the tariffs. Look, what's going on right now is a president who has reduced the entire China challenge into a question of tariffs, when what we know is that the tariffs are coming down on us more than anybody else, and there's a lack of a bigger strategy.
Senator Klobuchar, you've actually supported the tariffs on steel.
What we've got right now, though, George, it's
She
not
can
a
talk about the
focused
Iron Range.
tariff on steel. What he has done here, he has assessed these tariffs on our allies. He has
Nothing against
put
the
us in
Iron
the
Range,
middle
just
of
she
this
keeps
trade
bringing it
war,
up, so.
And he is treating our farmers and our workers like poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos. And if we are not careful, he is going to bankrupt this country. One forecast recently says that it has already cost us 300,000 jobs. All right? There is soybeans that are mounting up in bins all over the Midwest, in my state of Minnesota and in Iowa. So what I think we need to do is to go back to the negotiating table. That's what I would do. I wouldn't have put all these tariffs in place, and I wouldn't have had a trade policy where on August 1st he announces he's going to have tariffs on $300 billion of goods. On August 13th, he cuts it in half. A week later, he says he's going to reduce taxes. The day after that, he says he's going to do it. The leaders of the world are watching this, and it undermines our.
And they don't know what the hell's going on either.
And yes, we want fair trade, but we must work with the rest of the world. And he has made a mockery of focused trade policy, which I think means enforcement, like we've done in northern Minnesota, passing bills, getting President Obama to do more on that, so that our workers can benefit. So we are importing, exporting goods, and making sure that is a competitive policy, where our goal is that we are making things, inventing things, and exporting to the world. He is defeating that goal.
Secretary Castro, you actually in one of the previous debates identified China as the most serious national security threat to our country. I want to pick up on what Senator Klobuchar was saying, though. She said she'd go back to the negotiating table. The question is, what do you do for leverage? Where do you get it?
Well, look, I agree with those who have said that this erratic, haphazard trade war is hurting American families. As Senator Klobuchar said, 300,000 American jobs. It's estimated that it's cost $600 to the average American family. Just a couple of days ago, 60% of Americans said that they believe that we're in for a recession next year. So when I become president, I would immediately
Some economists are arguing as early as May
to ratchet down that trade war. We have leverage there. I also believe, though, that we need to return to a leader when it comes to things like human rights. We have millions of Uyghurs, for instance, in China, that right now are being imprisoned and mistreated. And in North Korea, this president is elevating a dictator. We need to stop that. We need to return to ensuring that America leads again on human rights. When it comes to this trade war, I would immediately begin ratcheting that trade war down. We have leverage in that discussion.
Senator Warren, let me bring you in on this conversation. President Obama signed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In part, it was designed to rein in China, to bring China in to some kind of regulation. What do you think he got wrong?
So our trade policy in America has been broken for decades. And it has been broken because it works for giant multinational corporations and not for much of anyone else. These are giant corporations that, shoot, if they can save a nickel by moving a job to a foreign country, they'll do it in a heartbeat. And yet, for decades now, who's been whispering in the ears of our trade negotiators? Who has shaped our trade policy? It's been the giant corporations. It's been their lobbyists and their executives. The way we change our trade policy in America is, first, the procedures. Who sits at the table? I want to negotiate trade with unions at the table. I want to negotiate it with small farmers at the table. I want to negotiate it with environmentalists at the table. I want to negotiate with human rights activists at the table. And you asked the question about leverage. If I can just respond to that one. The leverage? Are you kidding? Everybody wants access to the American market. That means that we have the capacity to say right here in America, you want to come sell goods to American consumers, then you've got to raise your standards. You've got to raise your labor standards, and you've got to raise your environmental standards so our companies can compete on a level playing field. We can use trade not to undermine American workers and not to undermine American farms and not to undermine small businesses in this country. We can use trade to help build a stronger economy.
Senator Harris, how would your trade policy differ from President Obama's?
Well, first of all, I have no criticism of that more than just looking at where we are now, which is that we've got a guy in the White House who has been erratic on trade policy. He conducts trade policy by tweet, frankly, born
But it
out
might
of
be
his fragile
easier to
ego.
compare your
It has
trade
resulted
policy
in
to
farmers
Obama's,
in
because right
Iowa
now, who knows what our trade policy
running
is?
bins, looking at bankruptcy. When we look at this issue, my trade policy under a Harris administration is always going to be about saying we need to export American products, not American jobs. And to do that, we have to have a meaningful trade policy. I am not a protectionist Democrat. Look, we need to sell our stuff. And that means we need to sell it to people overseas. That means we need trade policies that allow that to happen. You asked earlier about China. It's a complicated relationship. We have to hold China accountable. They steal our products,
small farms
including our intellectual
are
property. They dump substandard products
fairly
into
rare
our
at this
economy.
point.
They need to be held accountable. We also need to partner with China on climate and the crisis
Kind of
that
one of
that
those
presents. We need
groups
to partner
that
with China on the issue of North
folks
Korea. I am on, and I think the
are
only
kind of
person on the
obligated to
stage,
pitch
the
to,
Senate
but
Intelligence Committee and the
don't
Senate
kind of
Homeland
matter
Security
at all
Committee.
because their numbers
We
are
need
so
to partner
small
on the issue of North
to
Korea. But
effectively
the
be
bottom line
invisible.
is this. Donald Trump in office on trade policy, you know, he reminds me of that guy in The Wizard of Oz, you know, when you pull back the curtain, it's a really small dude.
Even the folks that I knew that were like family farmers, those were not small operations. They're, call them small farmers would be kind of ridiculous.
I'm going to take this to Senator Sanders right now.
There is a reason why in the last 45 years, the average American today, despite an explosion of technology and worker productivity, is not making a penny more than he or she made 45 years ago. And one of the reasons is that for decades
Zoom
we
thing
have
again.
had disastrous trade policies. And I got to say to my good friend Joe Biden, Joe and I strongly disagree on trade. I helped lead the opposition to NAFTA and PNTR, which cost this country over 4 million good-paying jobs. And what happened is people who had those jobs ended up getting other jobs, making 50% of what they made in manufacturing. So Trump obviously hasn't a clue. Trump thinks that trade policy is a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. What we have got to do is develop a trade policy.
Stream,
that
stop doing
represents
things.
Workers, represents the farmers in the Midwest and elsewhere who are losing billions right now because of Trump's policy. A trade policy which understands that if a company shuts down in America and goes abroad and then thinks they're going to get online to get a lucrative federal contract under Bernie Sanders, they got another guess coming.
Vice President Biden, invoked your name.
Yeah. Well,
Got another thing
We're
coming.
either going to make the policy or China's going to make the rules of the road. We make up 25% of the world economy. We need another 25% to join us. And I think Senator Warren is correct. At the table has to be labor, and at the table have to be environmentalists. The fact of the matter is, China, the problem isn't the trade deficit. The problem is they're stealing our intellectual property. The problem is they're violating the WTO. They're dumping steel on us.
Sorry about that.
That's a different issue than whether or not they're dumping agricultural products on us. In addition to that, we're in a position where if we don't set the rules, we in fact are going to find ourselves with China setting the rules. And that's why you need to organize the world to take on China to stop the corrupt practices that are underway.
Senator Booker, close out this round.
Sure. There's one point we're really missing on the stage right now, which is the fact that Donald Trump's America First policy is actually an America isolated, an America alone policy. Exactly. From trade to battling China to the global crisis of climate change, the challenges in the Middle East, he is pulling us away from our allies, out of the Iran deal, out of the Paris Climate Accords. And on trade, he's deciding to take on China while at the same time taking on tariff battles with all of our allies. You literally have him using a national security waiver to put tariffs on Canada. Now look, I'm the only person on the stage that finds Trudeau's hair very menacing, but they are not a national security threat. We cannot go up against China alone. This is a president that has a better relationship with dictators like Duterte and Putin than he does with Merkel and Macron. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, and our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand with our allies in common cause and common purpose. That's how we beat China. That's how we beat climate change on the planet Earth. And that's how American values are the ones that lead on issues of trade and workers' rights.
David.
George, thank you. I want to turn now to our troops overseas and to America's longest war in Afghanistan. U.S. talks with the Taliban are dead, according to the president. Secret talks at Camp David have been canceled before they could happen. Many of you have weighed in on that already. So I want to move past that tonight to what all of you have promised on the campaign trail. Many of you on this stage
Because
you'd bring the
they
troops home in your
made them?
first term.
I have
Others
no
said it in
idea.
their first year. Senator Warren, we all know the presidency is much different from the campaign trail. President Obama wanted to bring the troops home. President Trump promised to bring the troops home. And you have said of Afghanistan, let's help them reach a peace settlement. It is time to bring our troops home, in your words, starting right now. Would you keep that promise to bring the troops home starting right now with no deal with the Taliban?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. What we're doing right now in Afghanistan is not helping the safety and security of the United States. It is not helping the safety and security of the world. It is not helping the safety and security of Afghanistan. We need to bring our troops home. And then we need to make a big shift. We cannot ask our military to keep solving problems that cannot be solved militarily. We're not going to bomb our way to a solution in Afghanistan. We need to treat the problem of terrorism as a worldwide problem. And that means we need to be working with all of our allies, our European allies, our Canadian allies, our Asian allies, our allies in Africa and in South America. We need to work together to root out terrorism. It means using all of our tools. It means economic investment. It means expanding our diplomatic efforts instead of hollowing out the State Department and deliberately making it so we have no eyes and ears in many of these countries.
On the Middle East specifically, it's maybe
that is about our
both a blessing and a curse that I'm not going to be likely to be president ever. Because it would probably piss off a lot of people if I were to be in charge of Middle East policy.
Deal with the Taliban. You just said you would. You would bring them home. What if they told you that? Would you listen to their advice?
Yep, we still got troops in Afghanistan.
John McCain, 2 years ago this past
The numbers
summer,
rise and fall over
it had
time,
been Senator McCain's last
but we are still
trip
there.
before he was sick. And I talked to people. We did. We talked to military leaders, American and local leaders. We talked to people on the ground and asked the question, the same one I ask on the Senate Armed Services Committee, every time one of the generals comes through. Show me what winning looks like. Tell me what it looks like. And what you hear is a lot of because no one can describe it. And the reason no one can describe it is because the problems in Afghanistan are not problems that can be solved by a military. I have 3 older brothers who all served in the military. I understand firsthand the kind of commitment.
Well, if you're asking why people will be rather upset with my Middle East policy, to put it bluntly, let's look at what I would do with Saudi Arabia. I basically tell them, no, until you figure out this whole democracy thing. We're out of here. Like, deal with Iran on your own. We kind of don't care. And yeah, sure, that might lead to some issues with oil or whatever, but you know what? If we are in a situation where oil is now much more scarce, artificially due to conflict in the Middle East, that will be better for us in the long run. So yeah, it's awful, but that's why people probably should elect me president.
To follow the advice.
You know, I served under General Dunford, way under General Dunford in Afghanistan. And today, September 12th, 2019, means that today you could be 18 years old enough to serve, and have not been alive on 9/11. We have got to put an end to endless war. And the way we do it is see to it that that country will never again be used for an attack against our homeland, and that does not require an open-ended commitment of ground troops. Let me say something else, because if there's one thing we've learned about Afghanistan, from Afghanistan, it's that the best way not to be caught up in endless war is to avoid starting one in the first place. And so, when I am president, an authorization for the use of military force will have a built-in 3-year sunset. Congress will be required to vote, and a president will be required to go to Congress to seek an authorization. Because if our troops can
I have to agree. The amount of pain and damage done in the name of fighting terrorism has been way more than the actual original terrorism acts have been. They are scary events, they are frightening, they are destructive events, but we are very eager to overreact.
I'll tell you, as a military officer, the very first thing that goes through your mind, the first time you ever make eye contact with somebody that you are responsible for in uniform, is do not let these men and women down. This president is doing exactly that. I will not.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. I want to turn to
Rush has no idea what he's talking about.
The concerns about any possible vacuum being created in Afghanistan if you pull the U.S. troops out has been heightened by what we've seen in recent days on the ground in Iraq. When you were vice president,
I generally don't give much time to propagandists of that sort.
The president turned to me and said, "Joe, get our combat troops out of Iraq." There was a major drawdown of U.S. troops, and then ISIS seized, by some estimates, 40% of the territory in Iraq. You then had to send thousands of troops back in. Was it wrong to pull out of Iraq that quickly, and did the move actually help ISIS take hold?
No, it wasn't wrong to pull up. But I want to answer an Afghanistan question. I've been in and out of Afghanistan, not with a gun, and I admire my friend for his service. But I've been out of Afghanistan, I think, more than anybody on this, and it's an open secret. You reported a long time ago, George, that I was opposed to the surge in Afghanistan. The whole purpose of going to Afghanistan was to not have a counterinsurgency, meaning that we're going to put that country together. It cannot be put together. Let me say it again. It will not be put together. It's 3 different countries. Pakistan owns the 3 counties, the 3 provinces, and the East. They're not any part of it. The Connies run it. I will go on and on, but here's the point. The point is that it's a counter-terrorism strategy. We can prevent the United States from being the victim of terror coming out of Afghanistan by providing for bases, insist that Pakistanis provide bases for us to airlift from and to move against what we know. We don't need those troops there. I would bring them home, and Joe Dunford's a fine guy, but this has been an internal argument we've had for 8 years. With regard to Iraq, the fact of the matter is that, I should have never voted to give Bush the authority to go in and do what he said he was going to do. The AUMF was designed, he said, to go in and get the Security Council to vote 15-0.
Why did you trust Bush, though?
Determine whether or not anything was being done with
Why?
or nuclear weapons. And when that happened, he went ahead and went anyway without any of that proof. I said something that was not.
Don't give someone that authorization until you are damn sure what the hell's going on.
To put the troops in was that, in fact, we were doing it the wrong way. There was no plan. We should not be engaged. We didn't have the people with us. We didn't have our alliance. We didn't have allies with us, etc. And it was later, when we came into office, the president turned to me and said, "Joe," when they said we had a plan to get out, he turned to the whole security and said, Joe will organize this, get the troops home. My son spent a year in Iraq, and I understand. And we were right to get the combat troops out. The big mistake that was made, which we predicted, was that you would not have a circumstance where the Shia and the Kurds would work together to keep ISIS from moving in.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. I want to turn to Senator Sanders on this because the concern over Afghanistan is very similar to what we saw in Iraq when the troops came out. ISIS filled that vacuum. What do you make of people out there who are worried that if we pull out U.S. troops too quickly from Afghanistan, it will create safe haven all over again, like the plotters of 9/11?
David, let me answer that, but let me just comment on something that the Vice President said. You talked about the big mistake in Iraq and the surge. The truth is, the big mistake, the huge mistake, and one of the big differences between you and me, I never believed what Cheney and Bush said about Iraq. I voted against the war in Iraq and helped lead the opposition. And it's sad to say, I mean, I kind of, had the feeling that there would be massive destabilization in that area if we went into that war. As the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, I want to pick up on what Pete said. We cannot express our gratitude to all of the men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend us, who have responded to the call of duty. But I think also I am the only person up here to have voted against all three of Trump's military budgets. I don't think we have to spend $750 billion a year on the military when we don't even know who our enemy is. I think that what we have got to do is
The enemy is whoever Fox tells us it is this week, apparently.
climate change, bring it together in fighting against terrorism, and make it clear that we as a planet, as a global community, will work together to help countries around the world rebuild their struggling economies and do everything that we can to rid the world of terrorism. But dropping bombs on Afghanistan and Iraq was not the way to do it.
You could bomb the world to pieces, but you can't bomb it into peace. It's a song in my playlist.
Talk about
Anyway.
troops in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Vice President who was in the Situation Room, with senators who are on the Senate Armed Services, the Foreign Relations Committees, with an Afghanistan veteran who is on the stage tonight. As you share the stage with these candidates, what makes you the most qualified on this stage to be Commander-in-Chief?
I've signed a pledge to end the forever wars. We've been in a state of continuous armed conflict for 18 years, which is not what the American people want. We have to start owning what we can and can't do. We're not very good at rebuilding countries.
I don't
And if you
recall the
want proof, all you have
candidates'
to do is look within our own country,
nuclear
Puerto Rico.
energy policies there.
We've spent trillions of dollars to unclear
Personally, I am generally
benefits,
pro-nuclear
lost
energy.
thousands of lives, and thank you, Pete, for your service.
So I guess maybe that's what if you're all about the the nuclear energy there, then maybe that is a reason to vote for me as opposed to against me for the thing I mentioned before.
With restraint and judgment, what the American people want is simply a president who has the right values and point of view, and they can trust to make the right decisions when it comes to putting our young men and women into harm's way. And that's what I would do as president.
Mr. Yang, thank you. Jorge?
Thank you very much. Vamos a hablar de América Latina. You haven't been asked about Latin America in the previous debate, so let's begin. Senator Sanders, one country where many immigrants are arriving from is Venezuela. A recent UN fact-finding mission found that thousands have been disappeared, tortured, and killed by government forces in Venezuela. You admit that Venezuela does not have free elections.
Well, if we bomb the world enough that there's no humans left, then the cockroaches will fight for us.
Can you explain why?
So that's not going to work.
What are the main
Gonna have to
differences
get
between
even
your
bigger
kind of
bombs.
socialism and the one being imposed in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Anybody who does what Maduro does is a vicious tyrant. What we need now is international and regional cooperation for free elections in Venezuela so that the people of that country can make and can create their own future. In terms of democratic socialism, to equate what goes on in Venezuela with what I believe is extremely. I'll tell you what I believe in terms of democratic socialism. I agree with what goes on in Canada and in Scandinavia, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right. I believe that the United States should not be the only major country on earth not to provide paid family and medical leave. I believe that every worker in this country deserves a living wage and that we expand the trade union movement. I happen to believe also that what, to me, democratic socialism means is we deal with an issue we do not discuss enough, Jorge, not in the media and not in Congress. You got 3 people in America owning more
Yeah, my
wealth
kilobits went down to 0
than
again.
half of this country.
Why does it keep doing
You got a
that?
handful of billionaires controlling what goes on in Wall Street, the insurance companies, and in the media. Maybe, just maybe, what we should be
Yeah,
doing
Venezuela
is
is
creating an economy that works for all
a
of us,
mess,
not 1%.
to put it bluntly.
That's my understanding.
And it has been a mess for a while and will continue to be a mess for a good long while. And unfortunately, I'm not in a good position to really evaluate well what the hell's going on there, because a lot of the time, the big things people notice ends up being total fabrications. So it's like I have no idea what I can even believe as far as news reporting goes.
Here in the United States, offer temporary protected status (TPS) to Venezuelans. That is something that the Trump administration has failed to do. For all of his big talk about supporting the Venezuelan American community, he has failed. I will not. I also believe that we need to do things like a 21st century Marshall Plan for Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to make the dangerous journey to the United States. And under my administration, we're going to put renewed focus on Latin America. It makes sense. They're our neighbors, and we have a lot of things in common. It also makes sense that because we have a country like China that is going around the world to places like Africa and Latin America, making their own relationships, strengthening those. The United States needs to strengthen its partnerships in Latin America immediately, and I will.
Don't worry, I expect this will probably get blamed at some point. There's not enough of me arting to try to distract that, I think.
Eating less meat is one way to help the environment. You are a vegan since 2014. That's obviously a personal choice. But President Trump and Brazil's President Bolsonaro are concerned that climate change regulations could affect economic growth.
Well, one thing I'd like to see with nuclear energy is actually to have it taken out of the private sector, because we keep running this issue where businesses basically buy into old plants and then get all weird. It's like, oh, we're not making enough money, we'll have to shut down the plant. Hint, hint, give us a bunch of money state. It's like, well, why don't we just run the plants ourselves?
The factory farming going on that's assaulting this corporate consolidation in the agriculture industry. One of the reasons why I have a bill to put a moratorium on this kind of corporate consolidation is because this factory farming is destroying and hurting our environment, and you see independent family farmers being pushed out of business because of the kind of
my final thoughts of Venezuela is I can't really trust anything coming out of there, and I don't have any good reason to trust any of the big name politicians there. So, sort of a pox in both your houses sort of situation with me right now. Hypothetically, if I was president, I would have better intelligence, but I'm not. So.
Shameful reality in America that we send people off to war and they often come home.
Also, I don't super care what someone's general governing philosophy is if they are kind of a shithead and are authoritarian in some fashion. I'm very, at the end of the day, pro-democracy. And like, actually pro-democracy, not we're going to pretend that we're doing democracy and just sort of use that as a veneer to, engineer. Yeah, we just keep winning elections over and over again. Singapore.
2 years ago, and not only is the Amazon burning, Greenland is melting at a record pace. The last 5 years have been the hottest ever recorded, and we have a viewer's question about this. What meaningful action will you take to reverse the effect of climate change, and can we count on you to follow through if your donors are against it?
Yes, we will follow through regardless of the political consequences or who it offends, because this is the very future of our planet and our ability for our children and grandchildren to be able to survive on it. We will make sure that we get to net
my
zero
connection's going weird again.
Emissions no later than the year 2050.
Red, yellow,
we are
red, yellow.
halfway there by 2030. that we mobilize $5 trillion over the next 10 years to do that, that we invest here in Houston, Texas, with pre-disaster mitigation grants to protect those communities that are vulnerable to flooding, given the fact that this town has seen 3 500-year floods in just 5 years. You'd like to think you're good for 1,500 years, but you're not. They're coming faster and larger and more devastating than ever. We're also going to make sure that we free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and embrace renewable wind and solar energy technology, as well as the high-paying, high-skill, high-wage jobs that come along with that. And then we're going to pay farmers for the environmental services that they want to provide, planting cover crops, keeping more land under conservation.
Weiss, I don't know if that's going to be the case in Venezuela. I don't know enough about the opposition.
And can drive it and sequester it into the soil.
Plenty of times the U.S. has supported folks that were supposed to be, quote, bringing democracy in, and they end up just turning into a different sort of autocrat. Yes, we have an opposition party. They're just legally barred from having a majority.
You know that movie, The Day After Tomorrow?
What?
It's
Doesn't make any sense. That's not democracy.
We have seen a warming in our world like never before. We're seeing flooding in the Midwest, flooding in Houston, fires in the West. And I think having someone leading the ticket from the Midwest will allow us to talk about this in a different way and get it done. On day one, I will get us back into the International Climate Change Agreement. On day two, I will bring back the clean power rules that President Obama had worked on. On day three, I will bring back the gas.
I never said I'd tax the raccoon population, Winter.
Congress, which is good. On day 4, 5, and 6, I will, working with Congress and mayors and business people all over the country, introduce sweeping legislation to get at that 2050 goal. And on day 7, you're supposed to rest, but I won't.
Senator
This
Warren.
is what we need to do if we're going to get at climate change. We have to take this on as a crisis that's happening right now.
Senator Warren, should American foreign policy be based around the principle of climate change?
Yes. We need to work on every front on climate change. It is the threat to every living thing on this planet, and we are running out of time. Every time the scientists go back, they say we have less and less time than we thought we had. But that means we've got to use all the tools. One of the tools we need to use are our regulatory tools. I have proposed, following Governor Inslee, that we, by 2028, cut all carbon emissions from new buildings, by 2030, carbon emissions from cars, and by 2035, all carbon emissions from the manufacture of electricity. That alone, those three, will cut our emissions here in the United States by 70%. We can do this. We also need to help around the world to clean, but understand this one more time. Why doesn't it happen?
Puerto Rico statehood is a real issue for me, Weiss.
Attention to money than it is to our future. We can't make the changes we need to make. We have to attack the corruption head on so that we can save our planet.
Senator Harris, 45 seconds.
When I think about this issue, it really is through the lens of my baby nieces who are 1.5 and 3 years old. When I look at what is going to be the world if we do nothing when they turn 20, I'm really scared. And when I've been in the United States Senate for now the last 2.5 years, and I look at our counterparts, the Republicans in the United States Senate, they must be looking at their children, and then when they look at the mirror, I don't know what they see, but it's a lack of courage. And this is an issue that, yes, it represents an existential threat. It is also something we can do something about. This is a problem that was created by human behaviors. And we can change our behaviors in a way that saves our planet. I've seen it happen in California. I took on, as the Attorney General of California, I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. I took on the big oil companies, and we saw progress. If any of you have been to Los Angeles 20 years ago, you'll remember that sky was brown. You go there now, the sky is blue, and you know why? Because leader just decided to lead, and we took on these big fossil fuel companies. We have some of the most important and strongest laws in the country, and we made a difference. And my point being, I've done it before, and I will lead as president on this issue because we have no time. The clock is ticking, but we need courage, and we need courageous leadership. We can get this done.
Mr. Yang.
So to follow up on what Elizabeth said. Why are we losing to the fossil fuel companies? Why are we losing to the gun lobby and the NRA? And the answer is this. We all know, everyone on the stage knows, that our government has been overrun by money and corporate interests. Now, everyone here has a plan to try and curb those corporate interests, but we have to face facts. Money finds a way. Money will find its way back in. So what is the answer? The answer is to wash the money out with people-powered money. My proposal is that we give every American 100 democracy dollars that you can only give to candidates and causes that you like. This would wash out the lobbyist cash by a factor of 8 to 1. That is the only way we will win. And as someone running for president, I'll tell you, there's the people on one side and the money on the other. The only way for us to win is if we bring them together.
Kamala really wants to talk on this. I think a bunch of people do.
I'd like to have an academic discussion now about education. Mr. Yang, we'll stay with you. Here in Houston, the school district is facing yet another year of spending cuts. Like schools across the country, the system faces many challenges. One of them, thousands of students are leaving traditional public schools and going to charter schools. You're the most vocal proponent on this stage for charter schools. You have said that Democrats who want to limit them are, quote, just jumping into bed with teachers' unions and doing kids a disservice. Why isn't taxpayer money better spent on fixing traditional public schools?
Let me be clear, I am pro-good school. I've got a kid, one of my little boys just started public school last week, and I was not there because I was running for president. So we need to pay teachers more because the data clearly shows that a good teacher is worth his or her weight in gold. We need to
That's a lot of money.
the emphasis on standardized
Gold's
tests,
expensive.
which do not measure anything fundamental about our character or human worth. But here's the big one. The data clearly shows that 65 to 70% of our students' outcomes are determined outside of the school. We're talking about time spent at home with the parents, words read to them when they're young, stress levels in the house, income, type of neighborhood. We're putting money into schools, and educators know this. We're saying you're 100% responsible for educating our kids, but you can only control 30%. They all know this. The answer is to put money directly into the families and neighborhoods to give our kids a chance to learn and our teachers a chance to teach.
Mayor Buttigieg, 45 seconds to respond.
Step one is appoint a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education.
Yeah, the fact that DeVos is anywhere near anything involving education is just one of the most stupid things
Some
ever.
things are very complex for preparing for a future where knowledge is at your fingertips, but we got to teach more to do with critical thinking and social and emotional learning. Some of it is extremely simple. We've just got to pay teachers more. And we've got to lift up the teaching profession. I always think of a story from South Bend of friends who hosted exchange students from Japan. They had a student one year who wanted to be a teacher, and they kept in touch with her when she went back to Japan and to college. She took the exam to try to become a teacher in a society that really regards teachers and compensates teachers well. And she came up just short. So you know what she did? Since she was academically good but couldn't quite make the cut to be a teacher, she had a fallback plan. She became a doctor. That is how seriously some countries treat the teaching profession. If we want to get the results that we expect for our children, we have to support and compensate the teaching profession, respect teachers the way we do soldiers, and pay them more like the way we do doctors.
Senator Warren, to use Mr. Yang's term, are you just jumping into bed with teachers' unions?
You know, I think I'm the only person on the stage who has been a public school teacher. I've wanted to be a public school teacher since I was in second grade. And let's be clear, in all the ways we talk about
Must have had really
this,
good teachers if
money
you know
for
that age.
public schools
I
should
could barely
stay
stand by
in
second grade
public
teacher.
schools, not go
She was
anywhere
nice,
else.
but I had her 2 years in a row.
My commitment. We will have a Secretary of Education who has been a public school teacher. I think this is ultimately about our values. I have proposed a 2-cent wealth tax on the top 1/10 of 1% in this country. That would give us enough money to start with our babies by providing universal child care for every baby age 0 to 5, universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country.
Thank you, Senator.
Raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country. Cancel student loan debt for 95% of the folks who've got it.
Thank you, Senator.
And strengthen our unions. This is how we build an America that reflects our values, not just where the money comes from with the billionaires and corporate executives.
Senator Harris, 45 seconds to respond.
My first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. I think most of us would say that we are not where we are without the teachers who believed in us. I have offered in this campaign a proposal to deal with this, which will be the first in the nation federal investment in closing the teacher pay gap, which is $13,500 a year. Because right now in our public schools, our teachers, 94% of them are coming out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. And that is wrong. I also want to talk about where we are here at TSU and what it means in terms of HBCUs. I have, as part of my proposal, that we will put $2 trillion into investing in our HBCUs for teachers because one, as a proud graduate of a historically black college and university, I will say that it is our HBCUs that disproportionately produce teachers and those who serve in these many professions. But
Thank you, Senator.
But this is a critical point. If a black child has a black teacher before the end of 3rd grade, they are 13% more likely to go to college. If that child has had 2 black teachers before the end of 3rd grade, they are 32% more likely to go to college. So when we talk about investing in our public education system, it is at the source of so much. When we fix it, that will fix so many other things. We must invest in the potential of our children.
Senator
and I
Sanders,
strongly believe you can judge a society based on how it treats its
Harris,
children. And
your time's up.
On this issue.
Guess what? You're guessing. All right, here's the answer. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and yet we have the highest child poverty rate of almost any country on earth.
To follow up what you said, Winter, the way funding of schools in the U.S. is done is kind of ridiculous. A lot of it, in a lot of places, is based on local property tax and other sort of location-specific taxes. And so when you have an area that is sort of suffering from long-term economic, decay, despair, whatever you want to call it. Basically, people there are poor. They're not going to be able to pay for the schools necessary in order to educate the next generation to be competitive with folks from other areas where the schools are well-funded. And so you get the sort of geographical breakdown that is highly linked to the economic fortunes of the people there. And because it's the U.S., it also tends to have a very strong racial correlation between economic fortunes and location is also linked to race.
And talk to you about inequality in schools and race. In a conversation about how to deal with segregation in schools back in 1975, you told a reporter, "I don't feel responsible for the sins of my father and grandfather. I feel responsible for what the situation is today, for the sins of my own generation, and I'll be damned if I feel responsible to pay for what happened 300 years ago." You said that some 40 years ago. But as you stand here tonight, what responsibility do you think that Americans need to take to repair the legacy of slavery in our country?
Well, they have to deal with look, there is institutional segregation in this country. And from the time I got involved, I started dealing with that. Redlining, banks, making sure that we are in a position where, look, talk about
I need some
education.
water. We'll be right back.
I propose that what we take is those very poor schools, the Title I schools, triple the amount of money we spend from 15 to 45 billion a year. Give every single teacher a raise to the equal raise of getting out the $60,000 level. Number two, make sure that we bring in to help the teachers deal with the problems that come from home. The problems that come from home, we have one school psychologist for every 1,500 kids in America today. It's crazy. The teachers are, and I'm married to a teacher. My deceased wife is a teacher. They have every problem coming to them. We have to make sure that every single child does, in fact, have 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds go to school, not daycare, school. We bring social workers into homes and parents to help them deal with how to raise their children. It's not that they don't want to help, they don't know quite what to do. Play the radio, make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone, make sure the kids hear words. A kid coming from a very poor school, or a very poor background, will hear 4 million words fewer spoken by the time they get there. There's so much, no, I'm going to go like the rest of them do, twice over, okay? Because here's the deal. The deal is that we've got this a little backwards. And by the way, in Venezuela, we should be allowing people to come here from Venezuela. I know Maduro. I've confronted Maduro. Number two, you talk about the need to do something in Latin America. I'm the guy that came up with $740 million to see to it those 3 countries, in fact, change their system so people don't have a chance to leave. You're all acting like we just discovered this yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Secretary Castro.
Thank you very much. Well, that's quite a lot. You know, I grew up in one of those neighborhoods that folks have talked about, in a neighborhood that was grappling with the legacy of segregation. In fact, in two public school districts that were involved in a 1973 Supreme Court case challenging how Texas financed its schools. And I know that today our schools are segregated because our neighborhoods are segregated. Right. Now, I have an education plan like a lot of folks up here.
Basically what I was talking about earlier.
More, that would recruit diverse ranks of
Maybe
teachers.
I could be a presidential candidate.
Schools, but I
oh, God.
believe that we have to connect the dots to uplift the quality of life, to invest in housing opportunity, to invest in job opportunity, to invest in community schools that offer resources like parents able to go back and get their GED, and healthcare opportunities, and those things that truly ensure that the entire family can prosper. Those are the types of things that we need to do, in addition to lifting up our public schools. You asked a second ago about charter schools. Look, it is a myth that charter schools are better than public schools. They're not. And so,
thank you, Secretary.
While I'm not categorically against charter schools, I would require more transparency and accountability from them than is required right now.
Oh, hell yes. I've read so many stories about charter schools that basically cook the books in order to get themselves good numbers.
Yet for millions of students of color today, segregation remains a reality. Non-white districts typically receive $2,200 less per student than those in white districts. This means older books, less access to computers, and often worse outcomes. What is your plan to address segregation? And I'm not just talking about the achievement gap, but I'm talking about the opportunity gap in education.
So I'm hearing a lot of conversations on the stage and the way we talk about communities of color. Look, I live in a black and brown community below the poverty line. I've lived in public housing projects almost for a decade and saw the anguish of parents who are just so deeply frustrated that they don't have a school that serves their genius. I think I'm the only person on the stage, even though I had no formal authority as mayor to run a school system, I stepped up and took responsibility for our schools. And we produced results. A lot of folks here talking about raising teacher salary. We actually did it in Newark, New Jersey. And we didn't stop there. We closed poor performing charter schools, but dagnabbit, we expanded high performing charter schools. We were a city that said we need to find local solutions that work for our community. The results speak for themselves. We're now the #1 city in America for beat the odds schools, from high poverty to high performance. Strategies like investing in our children work. And I'll tell you this, I am tired of us thinking about these problems isolated, disconnected from other issues. That's why my friend Secretary Castro is 100% right. We are in the reality we are right now because, Vice President, of overtly racist policies, not 400 years ago, just in my lifetime. that we're redlining communities, disinvesting in communities. And more than just that, my kids are not only struggling with racial segregation in housing and the challenges of underfunded schools, but they're also struggling with environmental injustice. If you've talked to someone who's a parent of a child who's had permanent brain damage because of lead, you'll know this is a national problem because there's over 3,000 jurisdictions in America where children have more than twice the blood lead levels of Flint, Michigan.
Thank you.
And so if I'm president of the United States,
Indeed, I've seen the
it is a
map.
holistic
It's kind of
solution
frightening.
to education, from raising teacher salary,
Flint
fully funded special
gets
education,
the note, but it is far from alone. In fact, a lot of major cities have large sections where, yeah, the water is actually just, you don't want to drink it.
Environmental justice as a major pillar of any climate policy.
Thank you, Lindsey. One final question coming up. We'll be right back.
The final question. The final countdown. Well, I'm going to have to mute for the commercials, probably. Bum-ba-ba-bum-ba-dum. So how are you guys doing so far? You holding in there all right? I know I've been not so chatty during all this. I've been occasionally trying to listen to what's going on, but it's like, well, okay, that's kind of what they said before, or I know what they're all about there. But yeah, I don't know. Hey, I guess I'm just not feeling very snarky tonight. Yeah, the prevalence of lead in a lot of areas does cause people to have like brain damage when they're exposed to it, especially from an early age, and that does make it more difficult to get through school and get your education and all that jazz. And so, yeah, it is part of the complex problem that is, well, basically everything. Everything is very much linked together, and it is in the media where they ask questions, and a lot of the time they sort of like, well, I'm going to ask you this very concrete thing about this specific issue, and oftentimes it's like, okay, well, we can say a yes, no answer on this particular item, but it is very it's basically disingenuous to leave it as that. We have to look at the larger picture so we can understand the why of this answer, as well as what else we need to be doing. Oh, thank you, Ender. And so, yeah, I do like having debates. I do think they are of use, but oftentimes the start of where the questions are is kind of ridiculous. And a lot of it comes down to the moderators. These ones are okay. We've had crap ones, and at least one of the debates previously this season. Everybody raise your hands, and so you can say a yes/no answer that without getting any context or nuance at all. No, I do not support lead poisoning. That is absurd. Why would you even ask a thing? Well, we have to know what you feel about these things so the voters know. Do I look like someone who's trying to destroy America? No. Then assume the answer is the one that's not trying to destroy America, please. So 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 1 finger. It's kind of interesting sort of looking at some of the gestures they make. I have it muted right now, so, because they're doing the little chatty thing there, but, So that's what this all is about, Ricochet. I don't plan to be a replicant here. But if that changes, I'll let you know, okay? Happy, shiny reporters reporting on things. So, I'm working on this map thing occasionally. It's coming along pretty well. I'm going to turn it into a video at some point, set it to some music. Then people go like, what the hell, what is this? I'll be like, haha, it's something I'm just such a geek, don't mind me. I honestly don't know right now. A lot of it will kind of come down to who is able to massage the first few swing states in a particular fashion in order to either come out on top or to prevent someone else in particular from coming out on top. Basically, if Biden gets like a strong first place finish in like 2 of the first 3 states, he'll probably go on to be the nominee. On the other hand, if it's basically anyone else, there's a good chance they'll be able to do it. If there's a split, it's going to be a little more complicated. Are they back?
President confronts crises,
Okay, they're back.
defeats, and mistakes. So I want to ask each of you, what's the most significant professional setback you've had to face? How did you recover from it?
But to be honest, I'm not going to be deciding my vote on who has the greatest chance to win the nomination. And my views of electability of the general election, well, I made a video about how I think they're kind of bullshit. Because nobody... I was interrupting Joe. Now somebody else is doing it. But anywho, got protesters.
We're going to clear the protesters now. Just 1 minute.
I was wondering when there's going to be protesters. This president hasn't happened earlier. But, anywho, where was I going with that?
Senator Biden, we'll start the clock again.
There is a decent chance that there might be a split among the first few states, and that will make things very interesting.
We're sorry, go ahead.
And I think that's probably going to happen at this point.
There's setbacks and there's setbacks.
But I'm not sure.
And
I have no idea.
I think the
I can't make out what they're saying.
critical setback that can occur to anyone is to lose. Well, my dad had an expression. He said, "Joey, it's not a question of succeeding whether you get knocked down; it's how quickly you get up." And he say, "Never explain and never complain." And then go on to say that the only obligation that really matters, the most important thing, is family. And so I was raised to believe that that was the center of everything, family. And it could be judged on based how you treat your family and how you went from there. And it took, Kierkegaard said, faith sees best in the dark. Right after I got elected, my wife and daughter were killed in an automobile accident, and my 2 sons are badly injured. And I just been elected, not sworn in. And I lost my faith for a while. I came back. And then later, when my son Bo came home from Iraq and with a terminal disease, and a year and a half later, losing him was like losing part of my soul. But the fact is that I learned that the way you deal with it is you deal with finding purpose in what you do. And that's why I hope he's proud of me today, because he wanted to make sure I didn't run for president, but I stayed engaged. Because when you get hit badly, whether you're losing a job or you're raising a family like my dad, where you have to make that longest walk up the stairs to tell your kid you can't live here anymore, dad lost his job, we've all went through that in some form or another. And for me, the way I've dealt with it is finding purpose. And my purpose is do what I've always tried to do and stay engaged in public policy. But there's a lot of people that through a lot worse than I have, get up every single morning, put their feet 1 foot in front of another without the help I had. They're real heroes out there.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senator Warren.
I mentioned earlier, I've known what I wanted to be since 2nd grade. I wanted to be a public school teacher. And I invested early. I used to line my dollies up and teach school. I had a reputation for being tough but fair.
So
by
she
the time I
schooled people.
graduated from high school,
Excellent.
my family
You
didn't
will
have money
be
for a
schooled
college
here.
application, much less to send me off to 4 years at a university. And my story, like a lot of stories, has a lot of twists and turns. Got a scholarship, and then at 19, got married, dropped out of school, took a minimum wage job, thought my dream was over. I got a chance down the road at the University of Houston. And I made it as a special needs teacher. I still remember that first year as a special needs teacher. I could tell you what those babies looked like. I had 4 to 6-year-olds. But at the end of that first year, I was visibly pregnant. And back in the day, that meant that the principal said to me, wished me luck, and hired someone else for the job. So there I am. I'm at home, I got a baby, I can't have a job. What am I gonna do? Here's resilience. I said, I'll go to law school. And
And I'll sue their asses.
I practiced law for about 45 minutes, and then went back to my first love, which is teaching. But it let me get into fights, it gave me new tools, and the reason I'm standing here today is because I back up, I fought back, I know what's broken.
I have taken on virtually every powerful
I see it turn
special
red,
interest in this
and then my
country.
numbers drop.
Whether it is Wall Street, whether it is the insurance industry, whether it is the pharmaceutical industry whose corruption and greed is killing people today, whether it is a military industrial complex or a prison industrial complex. And I feel confident that given a lifelong record of taking on powerful special interests, of standing up for the working families of this country, that I will be able to take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite and create a government and an economy that work for all of us, not just the 1%.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Harris.
So that's 3 for tub thumping.
You know, every office I've run for, whether it be district attorney or attorney general, I was told each time, it can't be done. They said, nobody like you has done it before. Nobody is ready for you. When I ran for DA, I won and became the first black woman elected DA in a state of 40 million people in San Francisco. When I ran for Attorney General of California, I was elected because I didn't listen. And I was the only woman black elected Attorney General in the state, in the country. And each time people would say, it's not your time, it's not your turn, it's going to be too difficult, they're not ready for you. And I didn't listen, and a part of it probably comes from the fact that I was raised by a mother who said many things that were life lessons for me, including don't you ever let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are.
All right, who are you?
And when I look around the town halls that we do in this race for President of the United States, and I look at the meetings that we do in the community meetings, and I see these little girls and boys, sometimes even brought by their fathers, and they bring them to me, and I talk to them during these events, and they smile, and they're full of joy, and their fathers tell them, see, don't you ever listen and let anybody ever tell you what you can or cannot be. You have to believe in what can be, unburdened by what has been.
Senator Harris, thank you very much.
I'm not sure that one's quite tub thumping, when it's close.
You know, as a military officer serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and as an elected official in the state of Indiana when Mike Pence was governor, at a certain point, when it came to professional setbacks, I had to wonder whether just acknowledging who I was going to be the ultimate career-ending professional setback. I came back from the deployment and realized that you only get to live one life, and I was not interested in
So we got
not
one
knowing
YOLO
what it
then,
was
okay.
like to be in love any longer. So I just came out. I had no idea what kind of professional setback it would be, especially because, inconveniently, it was an election year in my socially conservative community. What happened was that when I trusted voters to judge me based on the job that I did for them, they decided to trust me and reelected me with 80% of the vote. And what I learned was that trust can be reciprocated, and that part of how you can win and deserve to win is to know what's worth more to you than winning. And I think that's what we need in the presidency right now. We have to know what we are about. And this election is not about any of us up here. It is not about this president, even though it's hard to talk of anything else some days. It's about the people who trust us with their lives. A kid wondering if we're actually going to make their schools safe when they've learned active shooter drills before they've learned to read. A generation wondering whether we will actually get the job done on climate change. And if we hold to that, then it doesn't matter what happens to each of us professionally. Together, we will win a better era for our country.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. Mr. Yang.
I was an unhappy lawyer for 5 whole months, and I left to start a business. And I'm going to share with you all one of the secrets to entrepreneurship. If you want to start something, tell everyone you know you're going to do it. And then you don't have a choice. You put your heart and soul into it, and even though I did that, my company flopped, had its mini rise and maximum fall, lost investors hundreds of thousands of dollars, still owed $100,000 in school debt. My parents still told people I was a lawyer. So it's a little easier. So I remember lying on my floor looking up, wondering how it had come to this. Eventually, I picked myself back up. I kept working in small growth companies for another 10 years and eventually had some success.
That's one more for tub thumping.
Success, I still remembered how hard it was, how isolating it was, how it feels like your friends no longer want to spend time with you. And so I spent 7 years starting and running a nonprofit that helped train young entrepreneurs around the country, including Sean Wen, who's here in the audience tonight, who left his gilded Wall Street job to become a food entrepreneur in San Antonio. Sean, I hope I made the process a little bit easier for you than it was for me. But the goal of my campaign is to make this an economy that allows us to live our human values and aspirations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yang. Senator
Right, so we got 4 tub thumping, 1 YOLO, and 1
So my biggest professional setback is embarrassing because a lot of folks know about it. I, with a bunch of tenant leaders in Newark, New Jersey in 2002, took on the political machine, and boy, did they fight back. I had tires on my car slashed, our campaign offices were broken into, my phones were tapped. It became a spectacle, and we lost that election. And here's a bit of advice to everybody. If you're going to have a spectacular failure, have a documentary team there to capture it, because it made for an Oscar-nominated documentary called Street Fight. But then, unfortunately, another setback, it lost in the Oscars to a movie called March of the Dagnab Penguins, for crying out loud.
Penguins will own you.
The people in my community
Never fight the Penguins.
told me, don't give up on the people, and the people won't give up on you. Create bigger and bolder coalitions, and you're going to win. And you know what? We came back 4 years later and won the largest lopsided victory in our city's history. But more than that, the lesson was there. We
So that's
didn't
another
give
tub
up.
thumping.
We were taking on America's toughest problems, from crime to poverty, and we transformed our city, creating tens of thousands of new jobs, the biggest economic expansion in our city, and as I said before, turned around our school system. There's more work to do, but I haven't given up on the people. I still live in that community. But this is the big lesson. My staff and my friends and my community told me, if you want to go fast, you may have won the mayor's race, but that's not what life is about. There's an old African saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. The lesson I learned of resilience is to trust people, because the power of the people is always greater than the people in power. And the test of America right now, it's not a referendum on Donald Trump, it's a referendum on us and who we are and who we're going to be together. We need to use this moment in history to unite in common cause and common purpose, and then there's nothing we can't do together as a nation.
Senator Booker, thank you.
I rather like that one.
Congressman O'Rourke.
Thank you, George. Everything that I've learned about resilience, I've learned from my hometown of El Paso, Texas. In the face of this act of terror that was directed at our community in large part by the President of the United States, that killed 22 people and injured many more, we were not defeated by that, nor were we defined by that. The very thing that drew that killer to us is the very thing that helps us set the example for the rest of this country. We don't see our differences as disqualifying or dangerous. We see them as foundational to our success, to our strength, and to our security, and to our safety. Yesterday, I was visiting with one of those victims. He's the head coach of the Fusion. This is a girls' soccer team of 10 and 11-year-old girls. His name is Luis. He was shot in the legs multiple times. He was shot in the side multiple times. He's still healing from his wounds in the hospital, but from his hospital bed, he's still trying to coach the Fusion girls' soccer team. Memo, his co-coach, is still fighting for his life right now at Del Sol Hospital. Those two men, Jessica and Marcella, their wives, they exemplify resilience to me. And when we end this scourge of gun violence in this country, when we finally confront the racism that exists in America, when we're defined not by our fears, but instead by our aspirations and our ambitions, it will be in large part, I think, thanks to the example that El Paso has set.
Congressman, thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
My challenges and resilience have brought me up here. I grew up with a dad who struggled with alcoholism his whole life, and after his third DWI, he had a choice between jail and treatment. He chose treatment with his faith, with his friends, with our family. And in his words, he was pursued by grace. And that made me interested in public service because I feel like everyone should have that same right to be pursued by grace. I then got married. My husband's out there somewhere, hopefully smiling, and our daughter. And our daughter was born. I had this expectation we were going to have this perfect birth. And she was really sick, and she couldn't swallow. And she was in and out of hospitals for 1.5 years. But when she was born, they had a rule in place that you got kicked out of the hospital in 24 hours. She was in intensive care, and I was kicked out. And I thought, this could never happen to any other mom again. So I went to the legislature, our state legislator, not an elected official, a mom, and I advocated for one of the first laws in the country guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. And when they tried to delay the implementation of that law, I brought 6 pregnant friends to the conference committee, so they outnumbered the lobbyists 2 to 1. And when they said, when should it take place, they all raised their hand and said, now. That is what motivated me to go into public service. And when I got to that gridlock of Washington, D.C., and got to work and pass over 100 bills, and I know a lot of my friends here from the left, but remember, I am from the middle of the country. And I believe if we're gonna get things done, that we have to have someone leading the ticket with grit, someone's gonna not just change the policies, but change the tone in the country, and someone who believes in America and believes it from their heart because of where they came from, that everyone should have that same opportunity.
Senator, thank you. Secretary Castro.
Yeah, I'm going to put that one down as baby power.
And thank you, George, to Jorge, to Lindsay, and to David, and to all of y'all for tuning in tonight. In many ways, I shouldn't be here on this stage. You know, Castro is my mother's name and was my grandmother's name before her. I grew up in a single-parent household on the west side of San Antonio, going to the public schools. Eventually, my brother Joaquin and I became the first in our family to become professionals. And when I got home, I took a job at the biggest law firm in town. I was making $100,000 a year in the year 2000. A few months later, I got elected to the San Antonio City Council. And the City Council at the time was only paying $1,040 a year. So everybody had another job, and my job was at the law firm. Well, a few months after I got elected, the law firm got a client. And the client wanted those of us on the City Council to vote for a land deal. The land deal was that they wanted to build a golf course over our water supply because we relied on an underground aquifer. I didn't think the Environmental Protection Plan was strong enough, so I wanted to vote against it, and my constituents wanted me to vote against it. But under the ethics rules for lawyers in Texas, because believe it or not, lawyers have ethics rules, you can't just go against the interests of a client, so I was stuck. On the one hand, I wanted to do the right thing. On the other hand, my livelihood, my student loans, my new house payment, my car payment depended on me shutting up, being conflicted out. So one day I walked into my law firm and I quit my job. And then I went and I voted against that land deal on the City Council. And, you know, it was the first test that I had, and I think back to that because oftentimes we think of politics and you think of politics as dirty or corrupting. I wondered before I went in it whether it would change who I was. And I was proud that when that first test came, that I stood up for the people that I was there to represent and not for big special interests. There's nobody that gets tested more in a position of public trust than the President of the United States. This president has failed that test. But I want you to know that if you elect me president, I won't. I won't serve anybody except you and your family. And together, we can create an America that's better than ever. Thank you very much.
Castro,
That was a pretty good answer, too.
Our candidates. It was a great debate. I think we learned a lot tonight. Thanks to you. Thanks to Texas Southern.
I'm going to put that down in the YOLO category.
Great crowd. Thank you.
So we got, on that last question, one, things are just kind of awful. One, baby power. One, you don't know me. 2, YOLOs, and 5 of thumping. And I'm going to mute the thing. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. This has been Is Explain. Not playing anything. Watching, listening, occasionally map working. They're bantering. Oh God, what are they talking about? Okay, let's shake some hands. Now, I'm just happy to be here, and it's good to meet you, Mr. Moderator guy. Yeah, no problem. True. Yeah, the lady, independent of what his actual positions are, he's also kind of an asshole. So I am so glad he's wasn't on stage this evening, just because I just got so tired of having to listen to him. And then being very conservative pushing sort of candidate. It's like not even like sane moderatism from him, but just like we got to do this other stuff because that's what we did back in the 80s to win the presidency. Wait, we didn't do that. All right. But I'm just so glad wasn't there tonight. So yeah, it was like, sure there was some exchanges, some banter and things like that, but I'd say it was less stressful, even as I'm streaming as opposed to typing it on Twitter, than it was the previous couple debates here. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to let the stream play on for a little bit. And I'll see you guys another time. I'll probably do a channel update video maybe tomorrow. I need to re-record the one I made for this month. But anywho, also more Minecraft, the rest of the stuff. Anyone who actually cares about my usual content.